Welcome to Tech Out West, where we unveil the tech leaders of tomorrow, today. I'm Paul Mikesell.
And I'm Sarah Lindquist. Join us as we uncover the untold stories behind the startups, the visionaries, and the relentless spirit that defines entrepreneurship in the wild frontier of technology.
Hey Sarah, guess who we have on Tech Out West today?
Who, Paul?
Today we have Adam Greenberg. Adam Greenberg is the founder and CEO of IUNU. That's IUNU. IUNU is this really interesting local Seattle tech company that makes agriculture robots for greenhouses, so indoor farming, where the robots go around and they track all the plants and plant health and looking at how their growth is, and it's transforming a lot of the way that we produce food in this country. Very exciting.
We're excited to jump in. Let's ride. Hey, today on Tech Out West, we have Adam Greenberg, the founder of IUNU. Adam, it's so great to be here with you today. To kick things off, would you share a little bit about what the company does?
IUNU does a multitude of things, but fundamentally for the community, what it does is it allows people to have fresh local produce for the masses. And so by fundamentally shifting the economics and the risk of growing in a greenhouse, tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, lettuce, it allows people to have decentralized food systems like we used to have in the 1800s.
That's great. And you're in Seattle company?
Seattle company. We're office in Pioneer Square. Yep.
Let's go.
Right on. Okay.
We've been in Pioneer Square for almost 10 years.
Outstanding. All right.
Still right in your Quest Field, right?
Yeah, right across the street. You can throw a rock right in.
That's right
in the stadium. We get in trouble for flying drones over there sometimes, though.
Hilarious. That's awesome.
Well, one of the things we really like to explore here is how does the world get an Adam Greenberg? Where do people like you come from? And so let's go back in time, and I'd like to understand a little bit. Where did you grow up?
Where does the world get an Adam Greenberg? I grew up in San Francisco, and I was born UCSF over 30 years ago. Thursday was my birthday. So.
Well, happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
And the city was where I grew up. My dad worked in Emeryville, so I got to be across the bridge a little bit, and then came up to Seattle in 2007.
Emeryville, right next to Berkeley.
Yep.
And so you were living in the city. What part of the city were you in?
Do you know Twin Peaks?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, so I was up in...
You were up on Twin Peaks?
Yep.
That's fine.
So you got beautiful views, right?
Yeah, I mean, people didn't care about views back then. Yeah. It was sort of this... Views have only been a benefit or something that people cared about in the last 20 years. Growing up there, people didn't really care, but we had a house built into the rocks.
Whoa.
Probably like 20s, probably built in the 20s, something like that.
Cool.
Yeah.
Duplex.
And you could look out to the north and see the bridge, Golden Gate?
No, we were looking east.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so looked down into the Castro Valley.
Oh, Castro Valley.
So on that side. And then...
Did you see like Yerba Buena and the Bay Bridge and all that stuff?
You could see the Bay Bridge. You could see Market Street.
Yeah.
And all the way over to almost to near Candlestick.
Uh-huh. So what did you do as a child there? Mm-hmm. Did you skateboard? Did you ride your bike? Did you play sports?
So I wasn't allowed to play video games growing up, and my parents wanted me to play in the dirt. So
good for them.
I grew up playing a lot of sports. It was baseball, basketball, tennis, and then I grew up also in Boy Scouts. So we had a little bit different than normal. Our football, baseball, and basketball teams all was in a single Boy Scout troop, so it's a little bit different dynamic than what you'd expect. And so once a month for a weekend, we'd all go out to the Sierra Nevadas, or we'd go canoeing, so there's a lot of camping, hiking, playing with fire, playing with knives, learning what it is to get through different forms of hardship. And
did you get a badge? There's like badges, right? There's
merit badges. There are merit badges.
Levels, right? There's levels.
Yeah.
There are levels.
How high'd you get?
I got to Eagle.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Eagle. What is that high in this?
That's like the creme de la creme of Boy Scouts. Oh yeah. It's like highest honor.
It is once you get there, usually people leave.
That's badass.
Oh, you didn't put that on your LinkedIn.
Dude, yeah, why is that on your LinkedIn? Why is the Eagle Scout the first thing you have on your LinkedIn?
Isn't really my thing.
So you would go as a troop, you go up to the Sierra, and you're camping, hiking, and all that stuff.
Yeah, and
wild animals. Do they have bears up there?
Oh yeah, we ran into bears all the time.
Did you? Yeah.
Bears are only scary because of what people tell you about them. Mm-hmm. But once you interact with them enough times, they're kind of cute.
Yeah.
And you just know what to do. And as long as you don't act like prey, they're not going to treat you like prey usually.
Huh.
And so we run into
life lesson
mama
there.
bears, and it is a life lesson in a lot of things.
Yeah.
But we used to 2-week backpacking trips on summers through Sierra Nevadas or Philmont and New Mexico. And then we'd go to 2-week canoeing down one of the rivers in California, or we'd spend the night or a weekend in the submarine, an old naval submarine, something like that. So you learn different survival skills through that program, and it was good for my upbringing.
Did you learn how to make a fire without matches? Can you do the stick thing?
Flint and steel.
Yeah, you can do flint and steel, but I definitely recommend lighters. They're usually easier.
Yeah, okay.
Or if you're really hard up, waterproof matches works pretty well.
Oh, that's good.
But you learn how to do those things. They're not really that relevant anymore.
Yeah.
I think probably the most relevant thing I found is besides the survival skills, where they're like, all right, you're going to go figure out how to survive for a weekend with a tarp or something, right? Is probably the knots. So like different types of 2 half hitches or the one-handed bowline or something like that. So all these
Still
knots.
do 'em?
Yeah.
You can still do it.
Okay, how long have you seen the show Alone?
Oh, yeah, of course.
You've seen it, right?
I've seen like 4 episodes.
How long do you think you could last on Alone? You're in the middle of Nova Scotia.
But you're allowed to, but I think they do give you one item, right?
I think
thought it was
you
7.
yeah, 6 or
Was it 7
7
things?
Yeah,
So you can like take a bow and arrow with you.
correct.
Oh, then I think being alone would be pretty easy for me. The older I get, the more introverted I become. But I think the survival techniques that they use are interesting. It seems
Yeah.
like people have breaking points.
Totally.
And-
Psychological, I feel like a lot of them. Most of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so just food matters. And I think how long I would last, I have no idea. I'd have to try it, but it's something I probably would try at some point. But fishing, hunting, like I like to do those things. So
Yeah.
that would be something
That's what I'm saying. Because I think
That'd be interesting.
most people bring what? Like a tarp, flint steel, bow and arrow, or some sort of obviously
Yeah.
hunting thing. But
People people do not usually bring an axe, right? I think that's one of the options. People never bring axe.
oh yeah.
Man, I don't.
I don't know. Anyway, but it's interesting.
So you think you could be alone for some of those? I mean, sometimes it's like 3-4 months. I think those guys are out there. You really think you could be alone for that long?
You could too.
Not me, man.
Yeah, you could.
No.
Yeah, you have your soldering iron right there. You'd be just fine.
Like you can't bring a soldering iron or like. But I really do. I really do think that's an interesting aspect because I wouldn't. I think a lot of people wouldn't be able to do it. I literally would not be able to be alone for all by myself for more than 3 days. I would really start losing it. I really would.
If monks can go years without talking,
Yeah.
us normal people, people who aren't that well trained, could probably go a couple months. And you just have to you'd learn a lot about yourself, right? People often talk to hide what they don't know about themselves.
True. I'm sure
And so I think we just learn a lot about each other if we just had to be alone for a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really, really well put. So I'm curious, what was it like? I mean, kind of both sides of the coin, like living in the city and then with the Scouts bringing you into nature, because obviously you love the earth, you love nature. Where do you feel like, I don't know, that love and passion really first started? And what was it like going back to the city, out into nature, back into the city?
So nature's kind of like my church.
Yeah.
And I go to nature to recharge.
Yeah.
And then the society is much more of energetically, it's more like a take, right? You put out energy, but it very rarely gives you energy. And so one of the beautiful parts about being in a city like San Francisco is you're so close to nature. And so you go and you play sports. I mean, I think sports teams is another thing that helped shape who I am. It made a big difference for me.
Yeah.
And the fact that the teamwork and the ability to keep morale up when things aren't going perfect, things
Totally.
like that.
Yeah.
And I think startups are very similar to sports teams sometimes.
You said baseball was your.
Yeah,
Baseball, tennis, basketball.
was one your favorite, or one
Soccer.
team experience your favorite or most formational for you?
I think baseball was probably one of the most humbling experiences for me because I was really good for a long time.
Wait, were you pitcher?
Catcher.
Catcher. Ah.
And probably one of the best things that happened to me is I was really good, all-star team, just like no doubt one of the best in the city, and felt like I was going pro. And then my eyesight went bad and I didn't know it. And so I went from batting top of the city, always in the all-star team my whole life, to batting like 100, like barely could see the ball.
And when was that? High school?
But you don't realize it was the end of grade school.
Oh, end of grade
And
school. Wow.
Your eyes, when they degrade, they don't degrade in a way that you can notice it usually. So that's why getting tested is so important. So I had no idea. And all of a sudden, one day I was in class and I go, hey, can you read the whiteboard? And I look at my friend. My friend's like, yeah, of course. And I'm just, right? Mm-hmm. And when that happened, had already been through a whole season of baseball where I went from being one of the best to one of the worst. And that is the most humbling experience.
Totally.
And I'm very grateful for it.
Yeah.
And so that was probably one of the most formative moments for me, was failing, right? And failing in a way where you felt like it was out of your control and you didn't know why, because you think it is in your control.
Yeah,
and you get your eyes checked, you get your eyesight back, and you're like, wow, the world looks so great again, right? And you just don't realize it.
Yeah.
Did you make a comeback after that?
Switched to tennis.
Oh, you switched?
So I picked up tennis pretty heavily and then learned quickly. I pick up things quickly. I like to learn.
Yeah.
I like failing and iterating and failing and iterating, and then learning quickly is fun for me.
Yeah.
Well, how'd you take that failure? Like, were you... Because you're right, that's something that's so hard to understand.
Not well.
Yeah. Because then did it make you say, okay, I'm done with baseball, kind of after that experience?
The way baseball's such a momentum sport that when you're good, you get more playing time. When you're on a team, when you're good, you get more playing time. It's so momentum based that you get a lot more ability to show how good you are when you're doing really well. And then when you do poorly, you don't get the playing time. So it takes even longer to climb back. Mm-hmm. And so it's much harder to just show up and be like, I'm better now. And so I switched to tennis because it was something that I could learn a lot quicker. It was newer to me, and I didn't know this, and my dad didn't want to influence me, but he played D1 tennis at University of Arizona. And I was like, hey, why didn't you tell me this? And he goes, well, I didn't want to influence what you wanted to do.
Wow. Good for him. That's probably hard for parents to do.
And so then I was like, oh, I bet I could pick this up quickly then. Let's do this. And so that's why I picked up tennis, and it definitely ran in the family. And I mean, I wasn't the best in the city, but it was fun to be able to pick something up and learn it quickly. And I put the baseball shenanigans behind me, and I still miss it. I love baseball, but it was a good experience for me. It's humbling.
So your dad must have thought a lot about how he was raising you and what lessons he was trying to impart, and how the experiences that you were having at that younger age would form your personality, what you believed.
Yeah, I got great parents.
Yeah.
My mom's an immigrant. She immigrated from Egypt in 1964 as a Coptic Christian. That's something that we don't talk about a lot because there's a lot of hardship for the family, and they had to leave everything behind, and a lot of religious persecution.
Is that right? Yeah.
Yeah, it was known as a brain drain.
I don't know about the history. There's some context here that I don't know. Yeah.
Ancient Egyptians, when they went from polytheism to monotheism, some of the earliest forms of Christianity were the Coptics in Egypt. So a lot of the old lineage of Egyptian people are Coptic Christians. And then in 600 or 800, somewhere around there, Muslims started to come into the country, and there were some crusades, right? There's always a religious crusade back then. In this case, it was the Muslims going into Egypt, and the Arabs sort of took over. And sometimes there was peace, but sometimes there's religious friction. And then Nasser took over, and the religious persecution skyrocketed, and they were put on a list.
Whoa.
And that meant that there was a high chance bad things were going to happen, and they had to find a way to escape. So
Wow. So who left? Your mom? Did she have siblings or her parents
my mom
too?
And her siblings and her parents all escaped with, I think they bribed their way out with fake passports.
Wow.
Because they took their passports away, and they were, sounds pretty scary, like they went through way more hardship than I have. So I guess that's one of the reasons why, if you look at IUNU, the company, our logo is Ra, the sun god. It's paying homage to all the people who sacrificed to help get my family out of Egypt.
Wow.
Wow. Where'd your dad come from?
San Francisco.
So how did they meet?
Is that where she went, to California?
No, they met at the University of Oregon.
Oh.
So my dad studied plants in University of Oregon. He left the University of Arizona and then met my mom there, and then they moved to San Francisco.
Oh, wow. So she escaped to Oregon?
Escaped to Switzerland, then France, then to Denver. A bunch of bad stuff happened in Denver for immigrants. If you don't speak English, they could beat you, right? And so there were a lot of bad things happen. So they moved to Oregon, and that's where they were raised.
Wow. There's a whole history there that I didn't even know at all.
Wow.
I feel like
it's recent history.
Yeah.
It's religious persecution's always been a thing, and quite frankly, it probably will be a thing, because people are always more focused on differences and tribalism than they are on how similar we all are.
Tale as old as time. And so it's interesting. So your mom wouldn't talk about it a lot while you were growing up, or does she talk about it more now with your family? Or
so talking about it a little bit more now, but I mean, it was hard on my grandparents.
Of course.
And so, I mean, they went through a lot.
Yeah.
And let's just say I feel like my life is 100 times easier than an immigrant with no money showing up to a country that is upset that you aren't fluent in English. And
yes, she taught herself English.
Yeah, and then like her mother knit her clothes. Like it was tough.
Yeah,
it was tough.
Wow.
So I think that's where I get a lot of my work ethic from. So like part of like who Adam is both. My parents were there for me growing up, and they sacrificed a lot for me to have these opportunities.
Yeah.
So I'm grateful for them, right? Like
amazing. And then your mom went to the University of Oregon.
Yeah, but she never graduated. So I'm the first on her side to graduate.
Yeah.
Do you think everybody that winds up being an entrepreneur has something that causes them to sort of be more tough? Be sort of forged in fire, or whatever the metaphor would be.
Kind of. I think that's one pathway. I think another pathway is people have a illusion of grandeur that then they get their hardship when they become entrepreneurs, and then they take their beating during it, and then they also become better. So I think you can either dive in with that chip in your shoulder and have a deep why and like doing something that other people wouldn't normally put themselves through, and there's other people who get their lashings when they're doing it. And embrace the suck sort of comes to mind, right? Like you have to enjoy feeling alive in times where there's hardship. Like you get the opportunity to feel pain. Like that's when you're dead, you can't do that. And so like you get to put yourself through hardship and trials and tribulations, and then you get an outcome. And depending on how deep you dig in yourself, you can usually change that outcome, right? And so I think some entrepreneurs have that chip inherently up front, and other people learn it.
Yeah. Would you agree with that, Paul?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
How did they get from Oregon to San Francisco?
So my dad grew up in the city.
They moved back.
On his side, we were, I think it was the 1840s or 1850s when the family came over on his side.
Really?
From somewhere.
Gold rush?
Shipwreck.
Is that gold rush?
Whoa.
Before the gold rush.
Yeah.
They thought they were going to New York.
Huh.
They got off being like, yay, New York. And they're like, this is San Francisco.
Oh, really?
No
Yeah.
way.
They're like, we don't speak English, but like, cool. And
Sounds good. Sunshine.
All of that, you probably know this because you grew up there, but all of that flat area, like Soma area, is all old ships that they filled in the ground because people were going to the gold rush and they were just abandoning their ships in the port. Boom, and they had so much of it, they just filled it in and they made that flat area.
Yeah, and the Barbary Coast went through there. And my dad's business is called Barbary Coast Botanicals.
Oh, beautiful.
Look at that.
So,
yeah.
There's a lot of interesting history there. And I think the city it had so many different neighborhoods with so much different culture. It's different now.
Yeah.
But growing up there were like, it was an immigration city, right? Because it was the Wild West. And there's a lot of history from not only Gold Rush, but like if you look at Treasure Island, right? That's where we played Little League, right? Like there's nothing out there.
That used to be an old naval yard, right? That whole thing.
Right. And that's where they filmed the Hulk in those big buildings out there in the shipyards. And then We used to play Little League out there, and all of that is from the 1906 earthquake. They didn't know what to do with it. So they went up to Yerba Buena Island and like, we'll just extend the island a little bit. So they just filled in all of this rubble, built an island with it. And they're like,
Oh, no way.
let's call a World's Fair and put it out here and be like, look, we have a big island now. And so
There's all kinds of weird stuff there in the bay. There's a sunken ship right there.
No
Yep.
way.
In the bay, and I know this. I don't know if you ever took pilot lessons, but it's one of the visual reporting points. They like just sunk a ship in the bay, and it's called the
Really?
sunken ship.
Really?
The Navy just like sunk this thing at some point. I don't know the history about it. But,
all my pilot lessons have been in Seattle.
okay, right. The sunken ship is a visual reporting.
If you ever go to San Francisco, all of so my family used to make fire hydrants and plumbing before it went bankrupt, I think in the 70s. And if you ever go to the city and downtown and a lot of history there, you'll see fire hydrants. And those fire hydrants, some of them have balls on the top, like big metal balls. And those are called ball top fire hydrants. And those molds and what you're seeing there, that was used for horse parking.
Oh.
And
No
so
way.
you'd go up and you could tie your horse to the fire hydrant to park your horse and then go do whatever you needed to do.
San Francisco's kind of an amazing city. They have all those cisterns there. You'll be walking down the street, you're like, why is there a giant circle of brick in the middle of the road, like half in the road?
Oh.
There's a cistern under there. And some percentage of the fire hydrants pull water out of the cisterns, not out of the public water supply.
Oh, no kidding.
So it's a distributed, independent system so that if the mains fail, the fire department still has access to water. These are the kinds of things. In some ways, this mirrors what you were talking about before. That city's been through it, right? It's grown.
Yes,
it's
it has.
learned to be tough and independent and get some scar tissue around these
Yeah.
experiences. Right?
Yeah. A rugged individual.
I think if part of both startups and in just history, or for say people in general, is you have to remember your history in order to be able to learn from it.
Yeah.
And if you are planning on learning everything yourself, like history's never existed, you're going to have to relearn most of society's lessons that have already been learned.
Sure enough.
So it's way easier to learn from history. And so that's why I like that San Francisco has that history and they remember it. So there's one of our fire hydrants is painted gold. And in 1906, there's a golden fire hydrant that pulled from a cistern that saved an entire neighborhood. And it's called the Golden Fire Hydrant. And so the city cares about the history so much that the whole fire department once a year holds a ceremony for that fire hydrant that saved like thousands of people's lives in 1906.
Wow.
And so they do that. And
That's
at the
great.
same time every year, I think it was like 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. when it happened. And they hold that ceremony just so they remember, what happened and how important it was to keep these systems working. 'Cause
Yeah.
Cool.
It saved a whole neighborhood. And so I agree with you on the history thing, but I feel like we're starting to get away from that as a society. We're forgetting, we're not only rewriting history, but we're forgetting what we learned from it.
Yeah, I agree with that, man.
Totally.
So what high school did you go to down there?
SI.
What?
SI.
SI. What's that?
It's a Jesuit high school,
Okay. What does the S and the I stand for?
St. Ignatius.
Oh, okay.
And it's so my dad went to Washington, and that's a public high school. And so St. Ignatius was a Jesuit high school. My last name is Greenberg. So it was definitely not only an interesting experience, but it was a great experience. I'll never forget, I had a priest, and I said, "Why'd you become a priest?" And the Jesuits are known for asking a lot of questions. And he goes, "Because I don't know if I believe in God." And I was like, "Okay, but
Interesting.
why'd you become a priest?" He goes, "There's only one way to find out."
No
And
way.
so this guy who full on priest lived his entire life was asking these questions. And so the level of questioning curiosity, the ability to ask questions and you can ask why and then ask why again and then ask why again and keep asking why till you get to the foundational understanding was something that I think not only the Jesuits good at, but like the whole education system that I was put through in high school there was, I'm grateful for that.
Cool.
That's awesome. Do you have siblings?
I don't have any blood siblings.
Okay.
I have 3, what's called triplet sisters, and they're wonderful. I haven't seen them in a while, but they are. I consider them sisters because we went through a lot together and grew up together, and
Like same neighborhood or school or just
same school.
Yeah.
And they're just, I don't know, they're wonderful people, and we sort of became really close, and so
Kind of adopted each other. That's
yeah,
fun.
kinda.
Yeah.
Wait, same, but not. You guys didn't live in the same house.
No.
It was you just call them your sisters.
Yeah.
As a how close you are. Yeah. Oh, okay. And you met them in school.
Yeah. But really, it's I grew up with my mom, my dad, and me in a house in SF.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you haven't seen them in a while. These sisters.
Yeah.
Oh, what's your birthday? You should call them.
I should.
That's really fun.
Did you? And you played sports in high school too? Did you do
Yeah.
tennis? You continued tennis in high school?
Yeah, tennis.
Did you? Did you go to? I don't know how it works, but did you go to championships or what?
Did you specialize in tennis
What the team
in high
did,
school?
yeah.
Okay.
I did, yeah. I think it's called lettering or something.
okay.
Lettering in tennis. Yeah.
Did you do all that?
Yeah.
You did.
I mean, it was
Letterman's
it was-
jacket, the whole kit and caboodle.
Yeah, all that stuff. Speaking of societies and patterns,
Yeah.
we definitely did the tennis thing and had a really good high school experience, and became captain at the very end, my senior year. And then I think the team ended up having some really good people. If you look at the team and you look at your colleagues, I guess they're technically friends at that point, but really you're trying to win with a group of your friends. They all ended up doing really interesting things. Like it's cool to see how almost all the kids I grew up with ended up doing stuff that's pretty interesting, and because we all were taught the playbook on how to think. I think one of the things that I'm grateful for is being taught how to do critical thinking, right? The ability to ask why, you're allowed to ask why, and you're allowed to critically think. And I noticed that a lot of my other friends who didn't go to school with me weren't always given the same opportunity to have critical thinking. They were told what to think. And that kind of bothers me. And so watching what happened to the people that I went to school with is kind of fun to watch them all blossom because they're all critical thinkers.
Do you think that's a different philosophy of the school?
Nowadays, I don't know. I think I haven't been there in a while, but I think the school helps with that. But I also think society's changing as well, where I think critical thinking is much less of a commodity these days.
I see.
Unfortunately. I mean, when your parents or my parents went to school, critical thinking was a class.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right? Yeah. Nowadays, that's not a class at all.
Yeah. No, they have another class called not critical thinking where they
That'd actually be uncritical.
Force you to read the papers and agree with it. Or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. For
Huh.
sure.
I mean, it's sad.
Yeah.
It's sad that we're so focused. Everyone should have the ability to work hard and succeed and have unlimited outcomes they want to go after. And so getting people up to the starting line, teaching them critical thinking, educating people is so important. And it feels like so much of what we talk about now is instead of getting people to become entrepreneurs, getting people to start, getting people to take the leap, getting people to think critically about any subject they're passionate about. Now we're starting to see a lot of people focus instead on equal opportunities instead of and we're focusing on equal outcomes, which is unfortunate for entrepreneurship and for innovation.
Yeah.
It definitely will slow down the speed of where society can go.
Yeah. Unless it just filters, right? Unless people who focus on, instead of opportunities, just only focus on outcomes, and then those companies just generally do worse over time. And you know what I mean? Like there will be some filtering that will happen on its own anyway.
Unless they're a monopoly.
Unless they're
There's some
good point. unless the government gets involved.
I mean, regulatory capture is real, right? Like I had I gave blood and I needed to get some blood tests, and 3 tries in just trying to get the test results, they were unable to get me the test results because somewhere along the process of just taking the blood, getting it to run the test and giving you the answer, that process was so broken that it took 3 tries. And that's regulatory capture. You have to go to one place.
Right.
You have to go to these single labs that your insurance covers, and they don't really care if it works or not because there's only one place you can go. And so it's a great example of where regulatory capture makes it so we not only have inefficient processes, but our outcomes are suboptimal. And now I've had to go get a blood test 3 times in the last 3 months just because they can't seem to figure out how to get the blood and run a test.
Yeah.
Is that the FDA, you think? Is that who that is?
I don't know.
I've had that happen to me too.
Yeah, it's just like, how do you...
Your blood like dies along the
FDA,
transplant.
and they're not, I mean, all these organizations are that way. They
Yeah.
just they do not want to help you. What they want to do is, I don't know what they want to do other than get funding, honestly. I'm starting to lose my faith in some of our institutions that survive in regulatory capture.
Only now? Just now? When did this start for you? Yeah.
Well, like I think a lot of people in tech, tech used to be a very liberal place to be.
Yeah.
And somehow I feel like along the way we hit this Ouroboros kind of scenario where the liberal tech people funded all these liberal institutions that then turned on the tech people. That's what it seems like is happening to me personally. That's what I personally see happening, not that's happening to me. Anyway.
Yeah. I mean, that I think the phrase that comes to mind is there's a tendency in humanity to bite the hands that feed you.
Yeah.
Because coming back to being not only ungrateful for where we are today, like all of us are living, 100% of the people who are watching this right now are living better. Let's say 99.9% are living better than people did 300 years ago. Like, so for the majority of humanity,
Yeah.
like we're all just killing it compared to, and that lack of continuity or respect for the history of overcome makes it so everybody is trying to find a way to rationalize how they're making an impact and how they're defending the way they see themselves, right? And so if you take a longer history approach, you take a zoom out approach, you start to realize that we're much more insignificant than our solipsistic tendencies are as humans. And so I think that's also becoming a big issue where people are starting to then lash out as ways to create change and impact as a way to show that they are significant.
Sure. Yeah, I believe that.
And that's just something that the level of, what's the word I'm looking for? The level of agency people have seems to be getting lower based on the fact that society has gotten so prolific at creating calorie abundance and being able to survive, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And so when you do that, you're going to have people who are collecting paychecks at institutions where there's no pressure to perform.
Yeah.
And when you do that, you start to find new ways to create significance and relevance for yourself.
Sure.
That's how I would describe it.
Yeah, sure. You're kind of describing a failing society. Maybe people will always like yourself will always stand out and be sort of, it just sort of highlights the differences, I guess is what I'm saying. In that you have more room to run.
Everybody can stand out. They just have to want to, and they have to be willing to go against the grain.
Yeah.
Like at the end of the day, it's always easier to be a sheeple than it is to think critically and do something that is against the norm.
Yeah. Okay. So where did you go to college? Did you go to college?
UW.
And were you already programming in high school? Did you ever have a computer?
Oh, no, I took programming courses, but no, I mean, I'm not a good programmer. Yeah.
So did you do anything technical in high school? Were you a technology guy? No. So when did you take your first programming courses?
Junior year of high school?
In junior high.
I mean, real good programmers are obsessed with it and have been doing it their whole lives.
Yeah.
I'm not that good.
Yeah. Okay.
So I can play one on TV.
Okay. Not your thing. Not your main thing.
Well, in order to perfect your craft, you have to be obsessed with it. Yeah. And I was more obsessed with sports and Boy Scouts and backpacking and traveling. And other things.
Doing other stuff. Okay. And then how did you go from SI, right, in San Francisco to University of Washington?
I applied to 23
And your parents
schools.
are Ducks too.
Sorry?
And your parents are Ducks too. So that was Oregon
Yeah.
Ducks. So that was a
But back
provocative
then-
choice.
I mean, back then yeah, right. Oops. Back then the way the college system works is very different than it is now.
Yeah.
Right. So back then you had, if you had above a 3.0, you were guaranteed admission to University of Oregon. And so for me, in my sort of standard form, well, if it's that easy to get into, then I don't want to go there. And the reason for that is I want to win, right? I like to win. I think that's part of why I was like, okay, I need to apply to these schools. So I went very aggressive and applied to like 23 different schools, if you include all the UCs and stuff like that, and tried to get into things from Boston all the way to Seattle. And I thought Seattle was a cool idea, and it's sort of obscure city in the Northwest and on its little island because it's just surrounded by thousands of acres and miles of forest. So it's sort of like interesting, but I don't spend a lot of time in Seattle. But California's cool. And then I thought about going to Santa Clara, and I was like, let's try something new. It was, I wanted to be in the biggest pond possible. So I think one of the things that my dad always pushed me for was he was just like, all right, you always want to go to a bigger pond. And the reason for that is because you never want to be a big fish in a small pond. You want to be in the biggest pond possible because then that's how you get to learn the most. And so one of the reasons why I went to SI over other schools is because a lot of the other schools had 400 people in them. SI had 350 to 400 in a class, right? So it's over 1,000 people. And so that's why we just kept going bigger and bigger and bigger. And so UW had 40,000 people. It had sort of that East Coast campus vibe. So it had a really nice campus, but in the center of a city that was on the West Coast.
Yeah.
Sure.
So yeah, that sounds cool. So I took the leap.
You got accepted to UW and a bunch of these other schools, and you liked UW because of it sounds like the geography, the size of the school, something new for you, a different place.
Yeah.
Did you travel up and see it? You must have gone up and see it.
Yeah.
Did you go with your parents? You go on your own? What did you do?
I definitely went up with one of them. I don't remember which one. But sometimes you just got to take a leap and go.
Would you major?
Did you have to pre-select your major before you went? Is that a thing?
I did the entrepreneurship thing, but then I felt like that was kind of an oxymoron.
They had an entrepreneurship
Major.
degree.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is an oxymoron, isn't it? Yeah, that's right.
I mean,
Yeah.
they had a good program, but like, I ended up doing an entrepreneurship focus
Is that through Foster?
through Foster and
Yeah.
business school, and then
Yeah.
also did finance because I had to have some sort of math or hard skill. I felt like not just, and then almost did an environmental science minor, but didn't finish it. And I was a little disenfranchised by the environmental science classes I was taking, just because it was a little bit more focused on geopolitical stuff as it was instead of like nature and chemistry and stuff like that, which I thought was interesting. And so
Environmental science, but it was focused on geopolitics.
it was like the activism stuff as opposed to being like actually about
Like earth sciences.
earth
yeah.
science.
Yeah.
So that was interesting, and I love the salmon and the orcas, but you can only take so many classes about them. But I learned a lot. I wrote a paper about oysters, so I got to learn a lot about oysters and how the Hood Canal has an underwater sill. There's a little mountain underneath, and that's why there's not a lot of interchange between. That's why there's a lot of brackish water there.
Wait, what? Take us through this. I don't.
So under Hood Canal, at the mouth, there's an underwater sill.
Where's Hood Canal?
Hood Canal is south of here in the Puget Sound.
Okay.
Oh yeah, you
And
should go.
It's
Beautiful.
a beautiful place that
Yeah.
people go, and they have once every 7 or 8 years, there's something called the red tide. And it's where the algae blooms and the oxygen gets eaten up to the point where like all the fish just die and float to the surface. And part of that is because at the mouth, there's an underwater sill, which is just a fancy word for a hill or a mountain that blocks a lot of the interchange between the ocean of the Puget Sound and into the tributaries and sort of that canal. And so
So the bacteria runs away.
Yeah. Was it like a mini El Nino or whatever? The same kind of cool water, warm water problem? ish. That
This one's about water interchange.
okay.
And then when it becomes, it is also warmer, so there might be some temperature. I'm not an expert at this, but
I'm not
there's
either.
You're the expert on this podcast.
You're the expert in the room, my friend.
Yeah.
Your
one-eyed
gospel
man in the
truth
land
right
of the blind. Anyways, so that's where you end up having the fish die and go to the surface, and so it turns out we also built a sewage plant down there, and so that's where we're basically feeding organic material into the Hood Canal. And so I mean, a lot of times when I go eat oysters, I'll ask where it's from, and if it's from the Hood Canal, I won't eat it. If it's not from anywhere else, I will eat it.
Okay, good to know.
Just because there's so much organic material being
Right.
pumped in there, and I'm sure it's not going to hurt you very often, but there've been some notifications by the FDA being like, hey, those are less safe.
Don't eat this.
And so I did a bunch of papers on like that interchange and how that worked and how oysters work. And I think oysters are awesome because they're basically just like living filters.
Sure.
And so if you ever want to filter out bad water, put a bunch of oysters in and they grow, and then they do a good job filtering, and then you eat them. So big fan of oysters.
That's interesting. So you'll ask where they're from. If they say any other place, you're like, cool. And if they say Hood Canal, you're like, no way.
100%.
But somewhere else, there's a guy or woman who studied one of these other places, and they ask, where are they from? And if they say whatever that place is, they'll say no. But then if they say Hood Canal, they don't know about it. So they're like, right on, bring on the Hood Canal oysters. You know what I mean? Like, I wonder if you discovered all the other, if you spent the time you spent understanding all the other oyster locations, you might be terrified of any of them.
Yeah, there's a high chance that that's true.
Maybe that's true.
Maybe with all the food we eat.
I mean, if you really look at our food system,
It's messed up, man. Yeah, I know.
like we don't talk about if you had to eat through our food system in a way that you knew 100% of what you needed to know, and you had full transparency, you would be eating giant gusts of wind.
Yeah, sure.
Like that's about all you're
Sounds
gonna
delicious.
eat.
It's
Organic.
I already feel satiated.
Actually, probably not organic.
It's also it's the scenario where if you were to design this system from the top down, you would never look like this.
Yeah.
But it's because all these pieces evolved in this way, and now we're like backed into this corner. You know, where you have all this.
I mean, if you zoom out again back to history, it's funny to watch how our food system went from completely decentralized to fully centralized, and now we're going back to decentralized. And that pattern of society is also happening in tech, right? You want to go from ISPs and laying the railroad or the idea of internet connectivity, right? And then there was a bunch of greenfield opportunities for software. So things like Amazon were born, right? And so then you went from heavy hardware to heavy software. And then right now you're seeing a bunch of hardware enabled, like what I like to call, we laid the transcontinental railroads and the highways, and then now we built things for that. That's the software companies. And now from a infrastructure perspective, we're going now to the edge and we're laying the city streets. And then once you lay that, then you're going to have another greenfield opportunity, whether that's in 3, 4, 5, maybe even 10 years, where there's going to be a whole bunch of just software companies built on top of all this new infrastructure. And so following that pattern, right, is something that you zoom out, our food system also follows, right? Everything sort of goes in cycles. And so the reason why timing is everything, but the reason why what we think is so important about what we do is we're bringing back the decentralized supply chain from centralized. Now we're going back to decentralized, and we want to be one of the enablers for that.
So going back to college really quickly, so you did that, and then when did this interest, like in the food system, and obviously, I mean, you grew up going to your grandpa's farm in Oregon, right?
No, I just visited it.
Oh, you just visited, not grew up.
No, I grew up
visiting there. Well, I know you grew up going to it, is what I meant. Grew up going to his farm. So when did the passion start, or has it always been there?
Passion.
Or
I'm a pretty intense person.
yeah.
What? That's the word you used to describe me earlier.
Yeah.
And I agree with
you
it.
did.
Yeah.
And so I think I like to bring intensity to everything I do. And so the food system felt like something that I cared a lot about, and I had a lot of intensity behind wanting to fix things in it.
Yeah.
And being...
So you always have. That was kind of my question. Or did you have any kind of catalyst moment where you're like, whoa, I want to do something
So we
about
skipped
this?
over...
Yeah.
I just kicked the camera. Is that
You're
okay?
okay. You're fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
We skipped over probably a really important part about... one day I'll write a book about this maybe, but
Ooh.
I think there's a travesty for people who aren't able to travel. And I think as society, subsidizing people's ability to collect other perspectives would have a lot of benefit for the world. And the reason I say this is because I studied abroad a lot. And I really prioritized going to Italy, the University of Washington, the campus there called Campo dei Fiori, India, South Africa.
You did this during
Ireland during college, yeah. Okay. And
so every year, would you go abroad?
It was something that I wanted to, I didn't do it every year, but I prioritized it.
That's a lot, yeah.
What I learned a lot about myself is that my perspective is one perspective. And the happiest people I ever met in probably my entire life was in South Africa and in Soweto. And they were sleeping on like makeshift beds with cardboard boxes, and they had a soccer ball, and that was their absolute, just so much fun. And that was their family, their fun, their people. There was hardship there, definitely. But part of culture and part of society makes you realize how materialistic the United States is, and how much the push to consume and materialism drives a lot of what comes for, let's just say, how we increase our GDP and how we get society to be so consumer driven, right? Because consume. Oh, something new just came out. Consume that too, right? And so
everything here I bought on Amazon. I just clicked. All this stuff showed up, right? And then I threw a heap of garbage away. Bubble wrap and cardboard and all.
Bubble wrap's fun though.
All those things got produced. All of those things got produced by somebody to make boxes and make packaging, just to ship all this stuff to me, so I could throw it all away.
Yep. Just to protect the product from being broken. Yeah. Which probably some of it was made in China, some of it was made in...
I'm sure all of it was made in China.
Somewhere in the Far East.
Yeah.
But the collecting perspectives is something that I've come back to, has made me realize very, very early on that people can have different perspectives and there isn't always one right answer. And so cultures, and I think there's tourists, which I learned to become less. As a kid, being a tourist was fun. I want to go collect a rock, or I want to go take a picture of a fancy view or something like that. And then it moved to being a sort of a visitor. And I think being a visitor is where you really are part of someone else's culture. You're not there to tell them how great your culture is. You're there to be as invisible as possible and observe their culture, because you can learn from them. You can learn from everybody, right? That's something that I fundamentally believe. Even people that you don't like, you can learn from. And most of the time when people don't like someone else, it's because they remind them of themselves and something they don't like about themselves, right? It's just a mirror. And so the collecting of perspectives when you travel allows you to see how other cultures can function quite well, and it's not your culture, and you might have different core values than them, but they can also be happy, successful, and let's just say long-lasting. And so by traveling, you're forced to be able to go look at other representation, other successful examples of societies and people, and you get to visit and observe what they're doing, and then you get to bring that home as, wow, there are other ways to do these things. And so critical thinking is one thing, but the creativity you get from thought exercises of like, oh, if I was in Soweto, how would I think about this, versus if I was in Italy, how would I think about this? You can start to collect different perspectives and apply these different lenses and filters to different problems in your everyday life, and you don't have to be just one culture.
Right.
And I think that's been a pretty foundational part of how I look at the world differently. And I'm blessed to have a family that would allow me to travel and took me with them.
Yeah, I was kind of wondering how did you have the time and resources to pull this off in college?
The University of Washington has some cool programs where they'll subsidize it and stuff like that.
Really?
And you can get credits for it. And then my parents would help me with some of it. And then also my parents also we were big into traveling as well. So I always wanted a dog, and they're like, well, we travel too much, and you're always in backpacking for 2 weeks, and you're always, and so it was one of those things where travel was a priority for the family. And so you got to go see how Europeans live differently, and the French live differently than the Spanish, which live differently than the Dutch, which live differently than the Germans. And I think that's actually really important for entrepreneurs as well, as the ability to understand how to shift lenses and perspectives, because you don't have to you want to apply different ones to different problems, right? They're different frames give you different answers.
That's for sure.
And so I think that's something that most entrepreneurs learn pretty quickly, is it's not always how hard you hit your head against that problem. It's also the way you approach it. And so I think someone famous said, because it's an original idea, but if you spend 90% of your time trying to figure out the problem, the solution becomes more obvious, right? And so
How do you study? How do you get a college degree if you're going to Soweto? And
well, I didn't at first. I went to Amazon too.
oh, I see.
So I left school for a little bit.
Oh, you had a longer drawn out
Yeah, and then I went back and finished
college
in
experience.
Yeah. So walk us through the timeline. So when did you did you work in between? Like
2 years in,
Yeah.
3 years in, something like that. I went to Amazon, worked a little bit at Amazon, got to go do a bunch of finance stuff, learned how to do Excel, SQL, table joins, all the fun things, and late night pizza in a cubicle.
Sure.
I think that was good for me because I understood what corporate America was, but also I learned from some really good leaders. I think there were some good executives there at the time. I don't know them now, but when I was there were some people you were like, wow, that's good culture, that's a good leader. And you also saw the same thing because it's a big enough company where like, that's a bad culture, that's a bad leader. And you could see, you could learn what worked and what didn't. It didn't. And the cool part is I didn't have to learn from my failure. I could just watch theirs.
Sure.
And so Amazon was a great learning experience. And then ultimately I went back and finished school, and then got my degrees, and then started a water company. And so what you'll find is food, water, and shelter, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, is a big foundation for everything I do. It's what I care about. It's what gets me excited. So,
But your degree was environmental science as a minor,
finish that
and then
one, yeah.
entrepreneurship as a major. Is that?
and finance and
entrepreneurship.
entrepreneurship are two separate ones
I see. And then this environmental science thing was a minor, or just
that I didn't finish. Yeah.
you didn't finish. So tell me about this Soweto situation. How does this come about?
Soweto.
Yeah, how do you even know about it?
The UW had a study abroad program, and you just have to apply, and they interview you, and you sign up, and they have programs that can help people pay for it. So it's like anyone can go, and you just have to really want to go, and you also have to know where to look, right? Part of universities that are this large is you get to be wherever you want to be, whatever you want to do. You get to, there's something for you to be able to do. Like there's interests for everybody, and you just have to know where to look. And I didn't know where to look, so I just asked around, and I wanted to travel. It's like, how to study abroad work? How does that work? And so you dig deep enough, and you finally figure out programs that make the most sense. And then the UW had one going to South Africa.
They had already selected South Africa as the
Correct.
place
And
they were going.
there was someone who'd done it before. They do it like once every other year or something, and it was the same person, knew how to lead the same South African study abroad, and it was focused on business.
What was the name of
And you interview Rick McPherson.
Shout out to Rick.
Yeah, shout out to Rick.
Hey.
But they have programs for specific classes, like a finance study abroad, or like through the business school.
Yeah, in this case, it was business school.
Yeah, like the classes and the programming. Okay, as opposed
you
to
learn about business. You sit down with business. I mean,
Yep.
one of my I did another business study abroad in India, and I'll never forget this, where you talk about shifting my perspective. We were sitting down with someone. They're called managing directors there, as opposed to CEOs. And we're sitting down with like some of the biggest banks and the Shopper Stop, which is their Walmart, and just basically huge companies. And like, why are they sitting down with us? But I guess someone had connections enough to get us in there, which was cool. And I asked the question, I didn't think they'd answer, and they did. And I said, so how do you feel about bribery? Like, heard you have a lot of bribery here. And they just laughed at me. They go, yeah, just like you. And I was like, as a kid, you're just like, what do you mean just like me? No way. You're the ones that have a culture of bribery, and we don't. They're like, well, no, everyone has bribery. You just hide yours. And by us making it transparent, at least we know where it's actually going. And he goes, and if you think that you don't in the United States, you're not looking in the right places.
Wow.
And as a student in college, you're just like, what? Right? Because there's a level of purity of thought that we're taught in school that is
Totally
not necessarily how
Sure. Yeah.
the behind the scenes of the world works.
Right.
And so it was just like a concept that never occurred to me, that there's people doing things behind the scenes that they consider bribery. They just think they're more pure than us because they do it transparently.
Right.
Talk about shifting my perspective.
So Soweto is in South Africa.
Yeah.
And it's a area, it's a suburb, it's a city. Like what? I don't know what.
So it's a rough area.
It's a neighborhood. What?
Yeah, I mean, you could call it a neighborhood,
Uh-huh.
but it's like where the certain hard areas where it's very difficult to live, and it's very
Yeah.
during apartheid, like if you were white, you couldn't go there, right? That type of thing. So it's like
Okay.
it was very segregated. And in some ways, South Africa was very segregated when I was there still, but it was more segregated through money as opposed to through race. But through money, it looked like race,
Sure.
right? And so Soweto was predominantly black. And so I really wanted to go to places that were not normal for most people.
Yeah.
And going to a place where people have almost no money, and that was let's just call it a victim of apartheid, and still was very much segregated. Like, I want, let me in, let's do this, right? And for a lot of people, it made them uncomfortable. For me, I was excited, right? It was something that, you feel alive when you go to do things that are
Sure.
something you've never done before. And so for me, it was cool to get to know these people and how happy they were, and culturally, like understanding how they looked at family. And they had a really strong family unit, and their happiness scale, regardless of how much problems they had, was off the charts, right? And at that time, there was I think it was a black lager, it was called. It was the regular beer, and then the fancy beer was Heineken, and that was it.
Yeah.
And so they would throw Heineken parties, and it was like the bougie parties that were, and it was just, they're having the greatest time. And so I felt like I was, what's the best way to describe this? I felt like I was part of their little community for just a blip of time, and they treated me like I've been friends with them for 15 years.
They welcomed you.
Yeah, and they're just so open, so nice, and so much fun that, like, you go, why can't we do this?
Yeah.
Why?
Where did you stay at? You stay with the local family? What did you?
I stayed in. It was attached to a bike shop. It was, I don't know. It was.
That's
I forget
awesome.
the name of it, but
Yeah.
there was a guy who was running it.
Yeah.
And it was cool.
And were you there for what, a quarter? Like 3 months?
Less.
Yeah.
I don't remember how long, but
Yeah.
less.
Yeah.
So why can't we do that? Do you have answers? Do you get any answers? You said they're so happy. Why can't we do this? What do you think is behind that?
The ability for us to be, so this is going to be, I have a question for you.
Okay.
The ability for them to be present gave them an outsized happiness and outcome, even in times of hardship. But one of the things that I struggle with entrepreneurship is, in order for me sometimes to motivate myself, I must maintain unsatisfaction with the status quo, right? Because if you get too happy with being present, too happy with being where you are in the status quo, then where are you going?
Yeah, sure.
And so I go back and forth with this like internal conflict of, you get to be unbelievably happy when you're present and purposeful. You want to maintain that and be that present, which I wish I was better at, right? I meditate, but still not that present compared to these people in this community, and still be passionate, driven, and unsatisfied with the status quo to want to innovate.
Yeah.
How do you do both of those things?
Yeah.
And sometimes for me, it's a push and a pull. It's more like a ping pong table than it is a I haven't mastered that, right?
I think, there's this thing about, they call them wartime CEOs and peacetime CEOs.
Yeah.
And I think that all entrepreneurs who are building an organization are, by definition, wartime CEOs. And what that means is, to me, that you're always trying to find the softness in your organization and figure out how to root it out before somebody else discovers it. But it means as an organization gets bigger, in a lot of cases, the wartime CEO has to go because it causes a lot of pain and problems at scale. And I'm saying that just reflecting on my time at like Uber, or even the stuff we did early on at Iceland. I was wondering if you maybe saw some of that at Amazon, but now I'm thinking about it, I'm like, Amazon, Bezos was a wartime CEO the whole time he was there, but somehow he managed to keep it going, even through massive losses, right? Just like turning a profit once every 4 years or something.
But that was on purpose.
Pretty interesting culture, right? Yet they're able to do that,
I don't believe in peacetime CEOs.
You what?
I don't believe in peacetime CEOs.
Okay.
I think that good wartime CEOs can come in different ways, but you have to be a wartime CEO who understands stage appropriate leadership. And the person who familiarized me with this was Chrisman Nofsinger, right? Shout out to him. And he talked about how there's different stage appropriate leadership for companies, for organizations, for communities, right? Companies are just a bunch of people who are aligned on a goal, right? It's not like it's just a structure, right? It's a societal structure. And if for you to be a peacetime CEO or consider yourself a peacetime CEO, I think you're just milking you're milking momentum, right? And so I think I struggle with that because it's not actually a long-term way to build value for both shareholders and build value for society. I think it's a wartime CEO that has stage appropriate leadership tendencies, who understands we're changing different stages. Some people can't do that, right? 0 to 1 and 1 to many. There's one way to characterize it. And other people characterize it as you're getting into what some people would call product market fit, then taking the market. And then once you can take the market, you either can make a market or you can expand vertically or horizontally, right? And I think the ability for people to change how they lead is a mark of a really good leader. And so when you say Bezos was a wartime CEO, I agree with you, but I think he changed his approach as the scale went up. And that I believe is the only way to actually create long-term, let's just call it terminal value. Like you're consistently going, what's the best way to describe it? The culture, I do think sometimes culture is what you tolerate, right? Senator Bob Kerrey, I met once, and he was in the military, POW, and he kept talking about how in leadership, it's what you tolerate, because every single time you go by something that's below your bar and don't respond, you don't have to react, but if you don't respond, then people think that's the new bar.
Oh, okay.
And you just can't as long as you keep your standards high, you can be a really good wartime CEO and scale up or down with the business. But if you're peacetime CEO, oftentimes you're tolerating things that are below a high standard.
Yeah.
And I think I think it's unfair to really good CEOs to be okay with the concept of a peacetime CEO. Maybe this is not what's the word I'm looking for? Maybe it's a contrarian opinion, but it's just not. I haven't felt like people want to follow peacetime CEOs and be stoked that they're working for them.
I definitely agree with that. I guess I've seen a lot of boards throw out wartime CEOs because they explicitly wanted a peacetime CEO. You know what I mean? So maybe that's bad in all of those cases. And you're right that the leadership style is not inspiring.
Yeah, it's just a slow decay.
Yeah.
I mean, if the board does that, that's fine, but they're recognizing that's a slow decay, and they're just milking what alpha the company's created. And so your culture's decaying, and really you're just fighting decay. I can see that. It's way harder to build than it is to destroy, right? Yeah. And so all we're doing when we're building is fighting decay in every facet of the business. Yeah. And if you can build, then you're doing awesome. If you're building in every part of the business, wow, you're amazing. But at some point, every problem you come up to is usually chalked up to something is decaying.
Yeah. Or you're not questioning your assumptions, like you might assume that because your product is dominant that you have the best product, but that's how you get overtaken.
Yeah, I mean, look at I'm not going to name names, but there are a bunch of monopolies out there that are large software companies that are completely decayed culturally.
Sure. Yeah.
And all they're milking their monopoly until the regulatory capture disappears.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. There's a lot of bad software that we're sort of forced to use.
Yeah.
People use it out of necessity just because,
Well, just like cloud. Cloud is just somebody else's computer.
It's true enough.
And we're all told that back to the pattern matching of history and society.
Yeah.
We went from hardware, right, to your own servers, to your own racks, to cloud. And pretty soon we're going to say, we have to move everyone's money to the edge, and all of a sudden it's going to come back. So everything follows patterns in society. And I think it's always the next thing. What's the next thing to keep moving it? And that's just what we're going through right now.
Mm-hmm.
So you did this thing where you were traveling abroad. You learned, and you decided somewhere along your lifetime that it was important to you to collect perspectives. And you were kind of learning about the world, probably, and about yourself at the same time, I would guess. And then how did you go from that to Amazon?
I think someone told me that it was impossible to get into Amazon to do some sort of program or whatever. And I was like, okay, let's try it. Right. I think I went to business school because everyone said that they all wanted to do it. And I backing up a little bit, Gonzaga, I got into their entrepreneurship program, which is a small, like entrepreneurship focus, like build companies. And I was looking at that, and I was looking at sort of how to do entrepreneurship. And so business school had an entrepreneurship program. Again, I know it's an oxymoron, but at the time I didn't understand that. So then I applied, and everyone said it was impossible. And then somehow I got in, which I wouldn't have let me in. So I don't know why they let me in, but I got lucky. And then from there, Amazon was sort of a similar thing, and they needed more finance people. And I mean, the team I was on had 7 open recs and 3 people on the team.
Oh, so, wow.
And so when you're in finance teams like that and they're growing so quickly, you learn a lot. You're just in the deep end of the pool, and I don't even think I did that good of a job there. I think looking back, I would have done it very differently.
What was the focus of the team, of this particular finance team?
Oh gosh, it was under Steve Scher. He was on the S team, on the executive team, and it was under marketing. So we worked with FP&A, financial planning analysis, FP&A of Prime, FP&A of social. We launched the social media team, and I say I was just the numbers monkey, right? Not actually doing anything impactful. I built dashboards. We did.
Let's go.
We did the browser integration team. We did the Windows 8 Amazon app. It was originally called Project Metro. It's been long enough now we can talk about this.
Wow.
And it was just the whole marketing floor of Amazon. And so there was email. And so my job was to help a lot of those teams, but also one of the consistent ones I did do every week was the weekly business review, the WBR. And I use some of this now in my current company. And it's metrics, and it's these like thick decks, but because back then everything was on paper, and so most of the time when you had problems, it wasn't actually with the data, it was with the printers. And so you're printing out 50, 60 pages of number decks that are formatted from Excel of the whole Amazon business, distilled down into revenue and visitors and sessions. There's a few other, I'll just call it different ways they look at it. I'll call them proprietary metrics. Okay. I don't know if I can talk about it, but they had these metrics that were important to them and that they were growing. And so my job was to go into the databases, SQL query, table join, VBA, put it together and keep it updated. And then when there were problems, figure out what those problems were, go to the different, because we would get into these meetings with like email, social media, browser integration team, affiliates. Affiliates was always funny because everyone's always trying to hack that system because you get 6% on everything everyone orders. And we always had to filter out companies who were trying to game the system. And so like one of the biggest ones that always tried to game the system is like porn sites, and like Pornhub and stuff like that, where
On Amazon?
would try to would open up an affiliate pixel
Oh, geez.
and try to get so everyone who
Wow.
so all the people who went to look at porn would then have an affiliate pixel, and then they'd want to get paid out for
Wow.
being a referral fee.
Wow.
And so there's some wild stuff. I'm sure they're still dealing with stuff like this.
Yeah.
And so, these are all the things that were kind of fun dealing with. I mean, I got to interact a little bit with the team that did the Kiva Systems acquisition, which was kind of cool. I got to go deep into the finance there. That was fun.
What was that acquisition? What did Kiva Systems do?
Kiva Systems is the warehouse automation, the robots that I think they now have 750,000 robots in their warehouses. And so I was there when we did that.
You were part of the M&A team?
That's
or
cool.
what was
No,
that?
I'm we did a bunch of meetings with the team who did the M&A. And so I got to be and learn from it and got to be around it. But I wouldn't say I'm the M&A. I wasn't the M&A team.
Okay.
But I got to learn a lot. And so I got to learn from them. And it was cool when they would share it. Like, here's how we're looking at it. And when you're in a group of people that are all finance minded, that are all numbers minded, that are all Excel minded, you get to do ask interesting questions and learn how they look at it from a numbers perspective and NPV and terminal value. And then the last thing that I think is interesting from Amazon is we used to always be very obsessed about our numbers to the point where holiday reporting became really important. And so I went from doing the WBR down to a daily during Q4, because it was always, how are we doing every single day? Because we did most of our revenue in Q4.
Wow. Yeah.
And so then that went to the whole executive team. And if something blipped at all or we didn't hit trajectory, like it was the most intense time was always Q4 at Amazon.
Yeah.
And you're learning not just what you expect to do Q4, but day by day, how you can tell based on what happened between December 12th and December 14th, what you expect December 20th to look like down to that level.
Yeah. And back then we were small enough that we were still looking at us compared to our competitors.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so we were very competitively
Yeah.
benchmarked as well.
Who were
And
the
focused.
competitors?
Walmart.
Just Walmart. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, all
That was
right.
probably the number one that we were always looking at.
Yeah.
eBay
yeah.
was in there maybe.
No, I mean, there was at one point when I was there, Groupon gutted a bunch of the floor. They just hired everybody away.
Wow. There's a group of people who wish they hadn't made that decision.
Definitely. But I think some of the leaders from there went some pretty interesting places. I think one of them now was the CMO of Airbnb. And so there's some interesting
Yeah.
people there. All are doing pretty interesting things now.
Yeah.
Okay.
So how long was this stint with Amazon?
I was between full-time plus part-time, probably just under 2 years.
Okay, 2 years, and then you went back to UW.
Yeah.
Finished your final 2 years.
Finished. I did it in 1 year. Yeah.
What you did in 1 year.
Do you
Okay.
still remember how to do a SQL join? Just
Table joins?
because you mentioned that a couple times. Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe I just think I have PTSD from it.
Yeah. That's
Where
right.
just like screwing up table joins was always like, and you had to wait and your queries had to take forever. And so sometimes they'd run for 24 hours or sometimes they'd
Sure.
time out. And it was so bad because you're always up against a wall. And then of course the printer breaks and then you have to go up to Fashion's floor. Well, actually down below is Fashion. And they didn't use the printer that much. So we always would go down to Fashion
Use that printer.
and we'd use their printer. But that was an extra 25 minutes. And so it was a shit show the whole time.
So would you? I don't know how interesting this is, but I'm interested. Did you have a DBA, a separate DBA? Could you recommend indexes? Could you say these are my queries? Why are they taking so long?
Yes.
Because there's cases where an index would help. There's cases where the way in which you write your query makes a big difference. There's ways, right?
Yeah. I mean, we
You
had
can order by something that's not got an index and it's going to take all day. And if you order by something else, it might come back in two minutes, you know?
exactly. But I think we also had a problem where we were limited by resources and we weren't on AWS at that point. So this was before we had cloud.
Yeah. Okay.
And so, yeah, we had DBAs, we had a backlog of people who needed help and a backlog of issues.
SQL is an insane language. The idea behind SQL was in the 50s and 60s, I think. They wanted to expose more of their data to sort of the back office without needing specializations. And so they said, well, what we'll do is we'll make this pseudo natural language. So the secretary could get the last week's sales numbers. So we'll write it to make it look like English. So it has words like select and from in it, but it's insane because you have to really understand what each of those words mean in context, and there's an order in which it evaluates which table you're talking about, right, based on where it is. It's nutty. It's like, and I can't believe I can't believe how like successful it is, and how when you get really good at it, how powerful it is, and also how just weird it is because it's kind of like writing a sentence, except not at all.
I use Google a lot. That's how I learned.
Yeah, you have to Google all the time.
I was Googling everything the whole time. I was basically trained by Google.
Wow.
And then hotkeys.
Yeah.
My manager was like, "I'm going to take your mouse away."
Yeah.
Classic.
And then you learned Excel there too, you said?
Yeah, hotkeys and everything on everything on a keyboard was how you just so much. You become a power user.
That's pretty amazing, to get that kind of experience at Amazon in that period of time when Amazon's growing and still has competition and heavily relies on you to get things right. And
yeah, but also I was an idiot and didn't really appreciate it at the time. Like looking back, I thought to myself, I looked around, I was like, this place, there's no way it's going to keep growing like this. Then the wheel's going to fall off. And I think it was like $197 a share before it hit 3,000 like 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And so I'm so dumb. I was like, this is the top for him, right?
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, oh, well, we'll see what happens from here. But the culture was already decaying from when I started to when I left pretty precipitously.
What does that mean?
Or what'd you see?
I'll say it this way. The best people and the smartest I knew at school wanted to work at Amazon. And the people who I wouldn't consider the best, or very obviously weren't the best, couldn't even get close to an interview at Amazon. And all the people who couldn't get close to Amazon then, today are all working at Amazon.
Okay.
And so the ability for them to build processes that scale were so good that the quality of people became less important to them, which I thought was interesting.
That is
to watch.
interesting, yeah.
And so at some point in the last 10 years, they just said, if you're alive, like there was at one point, I think they were flying in people in 737s, engineers. Like there was some wild stories you were hearing about it. Like HR was like, let's fill up a plane. Like we need more people. Yeah. I think they came from Eastern Europe or something, and we were just flying in people by the plane load.
Wow.
And so it was when you hire that fast enough to grow that fast, you can't keep, your culture changes pretty precipitously. Yeah. And so decay happens, but if your processes are so good that it enables you to scale regardless of your culture, that's fascinating. Someone's going to write a Harvard Business Review article about this one day or something. But the culture was very different. The people were different. The level of ownership was different, but the processes got better.
You saw this change happen during a 2-year period?
Yeah.
Wow, okay.
Well, and then you talk to people and they could talk about it on a much longer scale.
Yeah. That's so interesting. So when you went back to school and you decided to go back to school, you finished in a year, what had shifted for you in terms of what you wanted to do next? And how'd you pick what you did next?
I want to start something, and Maslow's hierarchy of needs was important to me, and I felt like we don't spend enough time on food, water, and shelter. Yeah. So like I think the concept of impact is largely bastardized these days because statistical significance matters and no one pays attention to that. Like I grew up with, like, you were told if it's yellow, let it mellow. If it's brown, flush it down. And then at that time I didn't have the data, but now I look back and I go, okay, what if everyone just never flushed toilets? How does that affect California's water? And you look at it and you do the math and you're like, that has no statistical significance. That literally, if we just didn't use toilets at all, it would have no impact on California's water usage. Why were they telling us this? Right? It was the concept of giving us false agency over something to get us riled up about the drought in a way that we would push for things as society, when in reality we had no agency on anything around that because most of it is industrial, which is water used for both industrial processes and agriculture. And I think depending on the year, it's anywhere between, people account for between 8 and 12% of all water usage from a direct as opposed to indirect or externality in California. And so it's, I don't know, I was from an impact perspective, I was like, how do we do something that actually changes impact? And then, so I ended up getting into desalination, and that company's called Pure Blue Tech. And the guy founded
this is right after you finished school?
During school.
Okay, during school. So after Amazon,
we got second place at the Environmental Innovation Challenge.
Oh, cool.
I got first place at the BPC, Business competition, whatever that was.
Yeah. Is that the Dempsey thing now?
We also did the Dempsey
Yeah.
Accelerator.
Yeah.
Or I think it's called the Dempsey.
What's that?
Yeah. With UW, the Dempsey Startup Challenge. They have it. And
Dempsey's a guy, a person.
yeah, I think Neil Dempsey, right?
Yeah.
That's what it's called now. I don't know if it was called that at the
Big
time,
donor.
but yeah.
And it's a startup challenge. Is it focused on environmental, or is it that was just startup?
The
That one's
Alaska
for-
Airlines now, I think, bought that one. So that's Environmental Adjacent Challenge by
Oh,
Alaska
yeah.
Airlines.
Okay.
And the business plan competition was an award, which is just cash for winning the best business idea. And then there's the Dempsey Accelerator, I believe, which was a $100,000 investment or cash reward for going through specific startups. And so now I have been a mentor for some of the Dempsey kids and and then I do some lecturing at UW now. But it's not really a lecture. It's just like, hey, let's talk about life as an entrepreneur, stuff like
Yeah,
that. But anyways,
yeah.
going backwards, wanted to do this water company, found a gentleman from Saudi Aramco who's a huge water user and reverse osmosis, and realized that as a country, we don't understand the power of reverse osmosis, and the majority of the Middle East is powered through reverse osmosis water, right? It's about $1 at that time. It was about $1.60 to $1.80 per 1,000 gallons. Now we're down to like $1.11, $1.12. I think at the high end $1.30 per 1,000 gallons of fresh water, which is actually not that expensive.
Yeah.
And we have this perception that it is, and part of that was in California, we built a desalination plant during the drought, and it got shut down when the water came back. And so for political reasons, people pointed to that as bad decisions, and everybody got fired on the political side and voted out because what a bad idea it was, because look, the water came back. And so it just shows me how, let's just call it uneducated we were on the water system. And so I was like, what are the biggest problems for water? And it turns out fouling is the biggest problem, which is when any type of filter fills up, it gets harder to push clean water through. You have to increase the pressure. It increases electricity usage. And so fouling is the number one cost. We had two different technologies. One we licensed out of Colorado State, which I learned how to do from the C4C, the Center for Commercialization. I think they rebranded it, but I don't know. It's basically you can license one of the most untapped, if you're an entrepreneur, anyone who's watching this, you can license thousands, probably millions of different technologies at universities through their tech transfers. And it's a phenomenal deal because they're just sitting there and most of the technology is dying on the vine.
Yeah.
And if you don't do it, no one will do it. And they'll take a small equity stake or a small royalty and off you go with it.
Is there an index somewhere, or how do you find it?
Someone should build that. Probably a good place to get alpha for if you were to start a venture fund or something. But the concept that you have all of these, they're called tech transfers, and these tech transfer units of each of these universities have thousands of patents and pages and just technologies, and you can just filter through them looking for tech and ask questions and like, oh, I like this one. They're like, great, here's our standard fee. And so
And they get some equity portion, and then or do you have to pay?
yeah, I think it was like 3%.
You have to pay upfront too, or how?
No, it was I think it was a 3% or 5% equity stake.
Just equity. Oh, wow.
And you get to license this full tech that they spent years developing. And so
Wow.
we did that with Colorado State. We did it with UW. And so we'd have a nanomolecular imprinted membrane, and we also have a ultrasonic transducer that you put on the outside of the membrane that can reduce fouling. So two different ways to do fouling. Started the company, then there's a bunch of grants that they got. And
How does it reduce fouling? How does that work?
if you shake at a highly granular level, if you shake a membrane really fast, it shakes the gunk off of it and allows the H2O molecules to go through it. And so
I thought the point of the filter was to catch the gunk.
yeah, but you don't want to fill up the filter with the gunk. You want to just wash it off on the some of it sticks as opposed to there's the water goes two different ways. When you push water through an RO membrane, there's the center of it has the fresh clean water, and then there's the reject water.
Got it.
And you wish for all of the gunk to go with the reject water.
Okay.
And some of it sticks on the membranes. And so then as these get older, you have to put more and more pressure, which means more and more energy through them. And the longer these membranes would last, the cheaper it is to do water.
Got it.
The longer these membranes last, the lower the energy is.
So you shake it at a frequency, and it causes those particles to move, to migrate where you want them to.
Yep.
Oh, that's very cool. Did you invent that?
We did an iteration on one where my name is on one of the patents. So I would say that my co-founder and I invented how to commercialize it, but the concepts were not invented by me.
Huh.
We licensed them. So
Through this tech transfer thing? Or?
Yeah. And every university has them. Like every
That's so good to
state
know.
university,
Yeah.
Stanford has it. They're all standardized. Like if you're looking for something cool to do that isn't just analytics for analytics companies, absolutely recommend this.
That was funny. Analytics for analytics.
I mean,
So don't you worry that my experience with university technology is that a lot of it is you like it aspires to be half baked. Like it's just so early, and the point was the paper, and they got the paper done, and then they're out, and so
100%.
you can't tell the quality and the accuracy of what you're.
Have to separate the wheat from the chaff.
There you go. Yeah.
I mean, you have to put in the work to figure it out.
Okay.
And we did this at a bench scale 12 years ago, 13 years ago. And as of this year, that company is now doing full scale. That's how long it takes.
Wow. What was the name of the company?
Pure Blue Technologies.
Pure Blue?
Yeah.
Pure Blue Technologies.
Yeah, my co-founder and CEO named it.
And so you and this guy, and where did you find your co-founder?
At UW.
He said, "Hey, let's go start a company." High fives.
He was passionate about water. I was passionate about water.
Just bumps.
Yeah.
He was talking. I mean, I truly believe that if you know how hard it is to be an entrepreneur and start a company, you most of the time wouldn't do it. Naivete is actually your friend in a lot of this case, especially with hard goods, things that are not just analytics for analytics companies.
I can definitely see where you're coming from.
And but we took the leap because we're like, this is cool. This is something that's impactful. And if we can get it to work, this is going to make a big difference. We'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And then we went to the business plan competition. Shout out to UW for this. And they're like, yeah, we like this too. Here's $25K. And we're like, well, if they think it's cool and we think it's cool, we should probably turn this into a company.
Yeah.
And then I left Amazon.
But how did you know?
I was part-time there at the time.
How did you know you could even start a company? Like, I don't know. I feel like, how do you even know that, I can go make a company? I can start.
Alan Leong.
Say that again?
Rest in peace. Alan Leong was a professor at the University of Washington whose his group of people around him, his students, have become foundational to many industries. And I'm not one of his best students, but I was one of his students. And one of the things he did is he created the space and the knowledge to be able to show you where the opportunities are, but never went any further than that. And you have to take it from there. And so he's the one who put me into the Center for Commercialization, writing papers on whether or not we were student VCs or something, and should we invest in this or not. And so I learned about this process, and I was like, hey, I should do this. And so we wrote a bunch of these capital allocation papers for the Center for Commercialization, and that's how I learned about it through him. And then from there, I was like, this is really cool. And these are at every university? And they're like, yeah. And I was like, how many do you have? And UW has invented Bluetooth. I didn't realize that. And they always talk about that. And so they get paid on all Bluetooth. And they're just, you're right. It's a graveyard of people just trying to put out dissertations. But there are definitely diamonds in the rough. And the problem is most of the diamonds in the rough are in hard goods.
Yeah.
And instead, right now, universities are spending too much money on things like AI, ML. And the forefront of that is always going to be in commercial, because there's so much commercial applicability that by the time these dissertations are done in ML at a university, like you're 2 years behind. Like they're all going after the wrong thing, because it's where the follow the money, right? That's where people are excited, but really the quality of your ML and the value of it comes down to the data that goes into it.
Sure.
But instead of focusing on the data, they're buying millions of dollars of GPUs and writing dissertations on ML that was largely obsolete 2 years ago, but they started it 3 years ago, right?
Sure.
And so I think we're unfortunately losing the hard sciences, is getting punished for that. And hard sciences is where we need to spend a lot of our focus over the next decade.
So when you got this, you found this technology and you said, let's go start Pure Blue, right? Wasn't it your instinct to go find the people who had worked on the technology and bring them on board?
We tried.
You did?
Yeah.
And what happened?
nice people, but entrepreneurship's hard, and oftentimes inventors and idea people are not the ones that are gonna. I'm dumb enough to, when I first started this, to think that idea people were worth like 90% of a company.
Oh yeah.
Right. I was one of those being like, that's genius.
Everybody makes that mistake.
Yeah. I mean, when you're a kid, and then you realize, wow, and they're great ideas everywhere. It's execution that's hard.
Yeah.
And you learn that through punishment. And so you bring these people on and like, they're a genius, they're idea people, they're going to get it. And then you move, I don't know, 2 months in, 3 months in, and you go, oh no. Oh no, what did I do? And that's just, you have to, you make them advisors and move on.
Yeah.
I have a graveyard of advisors of people I love as people, but not people that are able to get in. Right, we're all digging ditches.
Yeah.
And if you don't grab a shovel and dig with me, there's not a lot of utility in a startup.
Yeah.
I don't need people to stand around and tell me where to dig.
Speaking of people that stand around and tell you where to dig, how did you find the process of raising VC capital for this company?
Kissed a lot of frogs.
But you did raise for Pure Blue?
Yeah. We raised some money. Some really interesting people who cared about both. We did the grant funding stuff. I think we did the SBIR, NSF.
Okay.
Writing grants is an abysmal process.
How did you know about that?
We learned about that from a person at the tech transfer office who was talking about how some people do grants to get things off and running. We're like, we don't know how to raise money. Like, is our money tree out back or something? Like, where do you go? And they're like, oh, like you can do grants, so you can get investors. And they're like, what's your plan for raising money? And I'm like, I don't know. My dad always told me never to ask people for money. Like, I find raising money uncomfortable, right?
Yeah.
And I get now that it's sort of like a sales process, and I get now that they're actually lucky to invest in a company that can make them money. But growing up, you just don't ask people for money. Like, go wash and wax a car, go do something for it, earn it.
I think you learn you're offering them the opportunity to invest in what you have, what you have going.
But I had to learn that the hard way. I didn't get told that.
Yeah. So you said, okay, I'm going to try and get this grant for some NSF funding, you said, right? And you're going to sit down and write this paper.
Yep. And then we got some other angel investors to help us out that we met through, someone saw us win the business plan competition at the UW, and they reached out being like, congrats on the win. Can we write you an angel check? And I was like, wow. I think we have to incorporate.
Yeah. Yeah. We need a name. Yeah.
And
how much does a website cost? And so, so they reached out to you. How much did you raise in this angel round?
$100,000, which was a lot of money.
Totally.
To me.
It's, especially when you're in college, you're like, that's an infinite amount of money.
Yeah.
So I was like, this is going to be, here we go. Like, jump off the deep end, figure it out. And
did you get your grant too?
We ended up getting the grant, and we ended up winning it. I mean, I think the interesting part about the grant was that the people who, in order to get it, you had to have the right people around the table with PhDs. And so we had to go get an advisor. So in hard tech like this, one of the most fascinating processes that I got to give full credit for my co-founder for, Ryan, is we knew we had to get to building relationships with people who were way deeper in this, who've been doing this for years. And he was really good, and he built a relationship with effectively the godfathers of this industry, people who invented like modern day reverse osmosis membranes. I think he connected with the guy who invented GE water, Dave Paulson, Nano H2O, Bob Burke, Randy Truby. I forget where he was from. But all these people were like, if you were in the industry, those are the names you know. They were the ones who basically started all of this. And so by having them be like, no, this is cool, someone should pay attention to this, borrowing their credibility was enough to be able to get people to be like, well, these two monkeys are saying we're going to go do this, and we don't trust them, know them, and they have no idea what they're doing. But hey, this advisory board is pretty stellar. And we borrowed their credibility to get going. And I think that's something that from a playbook perspective, in retrospect, was one of the better decisions that we made. And he gets all the credit for it because he went out and made those relationships and still has them today, and he's still running the company. And by borrowing the credibility of people who do know your industry better than you do, you're able to not only get a lot more done, but get a lot more credibility, and it accelerates you. It skips the 1 or 2 phases of having to prove that what you're saying has any value to a society.
Right. Okay.
And so that's how that happened.
So then you're raising this money, and how long did this grant take? I'm fascinated with this grant thing, because it seems like every time I've encountered somebody who tried to get a grant, it was a lot of paperwork, a lot of waiting, a lot of proving various things that are important to the grant. People,
A lot of credentialism.
yeah, a lot of that. But that sometimes a huge portion of the grant money that's supposed to come in is taken up in doing all this preparation to get the grant, and that sometimes they're anyway. So but how long did this take? How much of that was true for you, or was it really just pretty straightforward? What was the deal?
Isn't there an old adage that basically says the younger you are, the more time you have, the less you value time, the more you value money. The older you get, the more you value time, the less you value money.
I mean, there should be, if there isn't.
You wrote it
I don't
here
think
today.
any idea is original.
Signed, Adam.
Yeah.
No, the signed Adam, if I could give one takeaway to everyone to be in startups, is cash is king and focus is queen. That's what I always say, because like you can't run out of money. Most important thing is you must stay focused, and as your dad says, you have to be monomaniacally focused. And so
It's a good Thomism.
yeah, it's a good Thomism. All right. So, but I digress. Grants. Yeah. Grants are a pain in the ass.
Did you get the money ever? You got?
Yeah, we got the money.
Wow.
And they were useful, and
How
they
much
were
was
helpful. $350,000.
Wow, more than the angel round.
Yeah, SBI or NSFs are actually fundamentally not only useful but foundational for most technology companies to get off there. I mean, there's another company, Zach, founder and CEO of Sigma Genetics, with Chris Peel and Matt Schultz,
Yeah.
part of our Seattle community here.
Right.
And
Wait, take me through this acronym, SBR, NSF. What? Or maybe I missed it.
Small Business something,
Yeah.
National Science Foundation
Okay.
combined.
Okay. Huh. So it is the NSF that's funding these things?
Yeah, and it unlocks so much value for people to get to that next step. You just got to get to the point where you go from lab scale to, hey, this thing's working and you can invest in scaling it to commercial. This bridges that gap. The problem is the way they do the paperwork, the way they do the credentialism, is it gives it to people who've done this before, who are largely academics.
Right.
And the opportunity would be giving it to someone who did the tech transfer, like, oh, you did a tech transfer and you want to go take this and scale this. What's your plan? Let's fund it. So it's if we were able to focus a little bit less on academia and a little bit less on credentials, a little bit more on like, is this going to be valuable if it's successful? Impact, actually quantifying the impact, then I think it'd be even more valuable. But it is working today as a benefit to hard science founders.
And did they take a portion of the company too? Did
No.
they get some licensing rights or nothing? It's just, here's the money, congratulations.
Go get it.
Wow, that's amazing. I had no idea.
How do you even know which grants to go after? Like, did you get any help with that, or you just had to research?
You apply to as many as you think
Yeah.
you can finagle yourself into. And
How do you even
spend
find them, though?
Thousands of hours scouring.
Okay.
Well, you go online.
Yeah.
You call people.
Yeah.
You call these offices, and they have like open grant. It's like open season, right? Where you're able to ask questions for a certain amount of time for the people who are going to be reviewers. And so I didn't know about that for the first one we
no
did.
kidding.
And so then we
Didn't know about that.
said, hey, we didn't get it. So what happened? And it was one of the first grants. And they're like, well, you didn't ask any questions. That's not what we wanted to look for. Well, how did we? Because they'll give you hints of like, oh, if you focus on these things, this is what we're trying to fund. Like they have a whole list of stuff that they want to go after. And you can ask them any questions you want up until a point. And then after that, everyone puts in their grants and then they give out the money to try to push innovation forward. I mean, from a resource allocation perspective, the government does a good job on this one of pushing innovations forward. And we didn't get like 3 or 4 of them, but you end up learn the system and the process, and eventually you get good enough to start winning them.
I had no idea.
I've seen companies try to come out to try to streamline the grant process, but I don't know if any have really taken off. Have you seen any?
Yeah. Well, it's like Sigma Genetics, just as an example, I like
Yeah.
talking about our community founders.
Yeah.
Right.
Does They have I believe, a full-time grant writer. Mm-hmm. And so,
Oh, there you go.
and they just churn out grants. And
There's a crazy guy on TV all the time who had the suit with the question marks on it, who published a book about how to get money from
Oh,
the government.
yeah.
Do you remember
Yeah.
that?
he also,
Who is that?
it was George Foreman, wasn't it?
No.
He said, like,
love
I'll
George,
patent
though.
all of your ideas for you.
Oh, that he too. He also, but this is maybe a decade before that.
Oh, okay.
And he was this really skinny guy, and he'd have these it was almost like infomercials, and then they became regular commercials. And he had this suit with these question marks on it, and he would always have this crazy high pitched voice, and he'd say, "Free money from the government."
Was
and
it
he was
Matthew
like,
Lesko?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. You don't remember this? This is not.
No, I mean, what you're describing sounds like the Joker.
Yeah, it's like, it was like the Joker, except more.
The Riddler.
Yeah. That's
The
what it is.
Riddler.
Yeah.
Except if the Riddler and Bill Nye,
I was just going to say Bill Nye.
baby, it would be this guy.
I watched a lot of Bill
I
Nye
was just
growing
going
up.
to say Bill.
Yeah.
Every time we had a teacher that wasn't in class for some reason or had to get in a substitute, Bill Nye would be rolled out on your big
Sure.
TV, and that's
Oh,
when you
yeah.
spent science
Me
down
too.
there. Yeah.
Me too. I heard a rumor that he actually doesn't like kids.
Really?
I have no idea where I heard that, so I could be spending false information, but as an aside. Anyway, so you
That's
did
a
this.
toughie.
I
Not
know.
liking kids, but dedicating your life to educating kids.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
He must.
How ironic.
I know. I know. Well, maybe I just made that up, but it's going to be provocative. Spreading rumors.
Yeah, there we go.
There we go. But
Yeah, maybe
okay.
you'll get canceled.
Yeah. Well, watch me.
Yeah.
So from there, where to go?
Yeah, they hit $450,000
Yeah.
fresh off the
Yeah.
presses, right?
It's fresh dough.
We were
350
rich.
that was crispy
You were-
government bills,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. You're rich.
Bills on bills on bills.
We're like,
Yeah.
what do we do with? No, it wasn't.
Yeah.
It was. How do we make this work, right? Because your plans and what you have to do, and it's milestone payment based. So once you get, you can't just say here's. They don't just say here's all the cash. Good luck. It's once you get to different milestones, you have to write it up, show them the data.
Wow.
Then it's milestone based, and then that's how you get paid. And so, we didn't take a salary. Like we were living off of. I was doing like stock trading at some point to pay our bills. Like it was, which I'm not that good at, but I paid. It was enough to pay our bills, and I don't know. It was brutal. Like we didn't take a salary for the first 2 years. Or
You didn't
something.
start like options trading, or just like I'm going to buy some. Yeah, you were doing options trading.
Yeah.
And how did you learn about that? Because you're a quant, FP&A sort of background.
I would be calling me a quant, which is an insult to real quants. I read How to Make Money in Stocks by
Okay.
Investor Business Daily,
Okay.
IBD. It was
Yeah.
recommended to me by a guy who lived in Mercer Island. And I met his wife in class at UW, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I trade." And I was like, "Oh, let's learn about it." And that's how I learned to like understand technical patterns and things like that. And I wrote a bunch of Excels, and basically, then when I say wrote a bunch of Excels, it's really just like equations and trying to find ways to analyze. And then you then have to worry how to remove emotion out of your trading, and then that's the hard part. And so then you basically build a system in which it tells you when you're allowed to trade, and you just have to be patient. And then you work with the IBD playbook, and you can make decent money doing it. I mean, it was soulless.
Did you learn Black-Scholes?
Oh yeah, Black-Scholes option pricing model.
Yeah.
Woo-wee, that thing is. No, I didn't have any use for that.
So,
I focus more on other methods and ways to figure it out at that point. And
this is the craziest thing I've ever heard. You started a startup, and you were like, "Okay, we have some money, but we don't have enough money to pay people and do the things we need to do. So you need to start trading stocks." And he said,
Yeah.
"Great, okay, here I go."
Love it.
yeah, I mean,
Okay,
it was that or drive for Uber or Lyft. I mean, at that point they were paying pretty well. So
Okay.
I mean, you're trying to find ways to keep the company alive, right? Don't run out of money. Rule number 1, don't run out of money.
Yeah,
2,
sure.
stay focused.
Yeah.
Because the more successful you get, with your company, the more distractions people try to bring you, right? And so the stay focused thing is really hard the bigger you get. At that point, we had lots of time, not a lot of money. And so, and because it's a hard good, as I call it, which is really just a science-based innovation, you couldn't push things like code, right? You had to go through the process. You had to get data. You had to do lab tests. You had to do bench scale tests. And so some things you couldn't speed up.
So you're doing that. And are you and your co-founder, where are you living? Are you still on campus or?
I was living in U District.
Yeah, U District. Okay. And then, so from there, working to.
I've forgotten so much about this. Like, you're bringing back memories that I don't remember at all.
Yeah. So you're doing that. And then talk to us about building the company from there. How many years it went?
At some point, it just, we built a plan, and it was like, okay, why do we need 2 business people for this?
Yeah.
Like, I love working with you, but like, you got this. So he did his thing, and I went off and did IUNU and found a 4-letter domain, and which is IUNU, and that was it's the ancient Egyptian city of light. And I was like, I can buy a 4-letter. I think it cost me $5,000 at that time.
Yeah.
Right? And I was just like, this is gold. Negotiated it, and I don't remember the exact number, but and then I went off after food. And
so you bought the domain IUNU before IUNU was IUNU, before you had the
correct.
idea.
I mean, at that point, we were looking at plasma lights, and because you use plasma for...
Plasma is part of the process of making the laser in these.
Yeah. And so it's really energy efficient, right? And that was cool. And so we found a company out of California that was doing, it was the size of your fingernail, your pinky fingernail, and was putting out like 1,000 watts of lumens, and it was really intense. Like, this is cool. We ended up putting ultrasonic transducers and cameras in these lights and in fans and in infrastructure, if you will. That was the concept. And then people were like, I don't want your lights.
What were the transducers for?
Ultrasound, to like get the height of the plants and stuff like that.
Oh.
I was just like, how do we measure the plant underneath the infrastructure?
Right.
Yeah.
And
wait, so back up a little bit though. So how did the idea first start? You're like, plants.
Food. First water, now food. It was without a shelter, right?
Yes. So the food, and then what with food?
But you were doing indoor food the whole from the beginning?
Yeah.
Greenhouses.
Okay. First place was Northwest Horticulture.
Okay.
Which sadly just closed. They've been through some turmoil, but it was cool to get the startup there. And long story short of it is once we got told that the CapEx boat anchor was worthless, and we were trying to figure out the idea maze, but cameras would be cool. And for those who don't know, there's been a massive labor shortage. So it's not that there aren't any jobs. It's that no one who is in the U.S. really wants to work these jobs. They're hard labor. And so most people think that people who pick tomatoes today are making like $5 an hour. No, they make between $20 and $28 an hour. And if they're really good, they make 30 plus. Like, it's not bad for what they're doing. It's just hard work.
It's very, very hard work.
Yeah. And so with this labor shortage, inventory is a big problem, and inventory tracking. And we thought, okay, well, we took a bunch of, I think at that point it was Raspberry Pis, and we duct taped them to the ceiling. And we duct taped like dozens of them. And we were looking at the leaf and trying to figure out how to get issues.
And who's we? Do you have a co-founder at this point, or?
There's a large group of us. I think it's any given point there were anywhere between 3 or 5 of us that were tackling at this. At one point we had, before we got the office, we had a mechanical engineer and a sales guy, Travis and Kyle, and they were living in Bellevue, and we were working out of their house and building cameras on their air hockey table. And we ended up getting someone's glue on there and things like that. It no longer was an air hockey table; it was just a workbench. And then came the office. But a lot of people filtered in and out at this point.
Okay.
Because I was going through the idea maze, right? And when I say I should say we, because none of this I did alone. And quite frankly, I didn't. Most of the cool stuff we do, I didn't do any of it. And we went through the idea maze until about 2017, and that's when we realized that the problems facing in the food community weren't finding if this leaf was curling or yellowing. It was like, we don't even know where our stuff is. So we went up to Northwest Horticulture, which is then called Skagit Horticulture, which now just closed, I think, last month, which is sad. And it was a $100 million a year ornamental business that was growing lettuce for Cisco and flowers and things like that. And they just said, can you just track our inventory for us? And we were just like, well, don't you want us to find an issue? And they said, no, we just need to know where everything is. Can you count them? And so what we realized going through the idea maze was that a lot of the problems that people have are more foundational because it is a live good, and really the best practices manufacturing was hard to bring because it wasn't as precise. And so when you go through that idea maze and you ask questions, and most of the time your hypothesis is wrong when you get started, and I was wrong probably 150 times before we got to something that made sense, but you have to measure the thing you're manufacturing. You want to do lasers, you want to do ultrasound, but ultimately you needed the thumbprint or the fingerprint or the facial recognition concept had to happen for plants because you have to be able to track everything. And so inventory tracking became foundational, integrations became foundational, and then it was like, okay, now let's build counts and figuring out ways to do things that would add analysis to bring really best practices manufacturing concepts to the horticulture industry and food industry. And that hadn't happened yet. And so I was like, wow, that's really cool. You're doing manufacturing lean, Six Sigma, you're measuring what you're manufacturing, and how do we bring it over here? And people are like, you can't do it. And so I think that's where after going through that idea maze and sleeping in the office and failing a lot, we then realized that had to get rid of the CapEx boat anchor of lights and things like that. And I think that was really a nail in the coffin for us. There was when one of our vendors sent us, it was pure GE quartz you had to use for the plasma. Yeah. You had to have pure quartz, and we spent a bunch of money. We bought the bulbs and we turned them all on, and they all blew up.
Oh.
And I think that was like $100,000. And that was a lot for us at that moment. And then the company that we bought them from went bankrupt, or they got bought by someone in China, and they shipped everything to China.
Poof.
And then we were like, well, where did we get our warranty and stuff like that? And their response was, I actually don't think they responded.
Yeah, new phone, who dis?
Wow.
And so it was sort of, we pivoted a lot. Like, probably the most extreme pivot of the entire thing was when that happened, and immediately went into like, okay, we're going hard pivot to just cameras. And then from there, it was a hard pivot from figuring out a way to look at a static plant to how do we move plants around and track plants. So then we used drones, but drones had too much prop wash and wind. So then we spread pests and diseases everywhere. And so then the farmers and growers were like, what are you doing? Like, I'm trying to contain my pests. And so we had to put the camera on the rail, and that's how we really went through the idea maze to get to where we are today. And ultimately we built it on a drone platform so we can go back to drones once drones are small enough. But the cost effectiveness of these big drones with all this prop wash wasn't economically viable, or commercially viable, because they didn't want that amount of wind on their plants. And once you get them small enough that you can handle it, then we'll just port it back over into drones.
Mm-hmm.
The drones need to be the right size to carry the cameras. The camera technology needs to get micro enough that the drones can be.
And the battery life.
Yeah, and the battery. Yeah, sure. Okay.
And then OSHA.
Yeah.
And then and then some of the crops are grown vertically. So then now we have something that goes down the side that looks at tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, strawberries, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So is that how you solved this inventory problem? It was entirely visually?
Correct.
Okay, so it wasn't like bar scanning or anything. It was just, how many plants do I have? Your Raspberry Pi with a camera would needed to look and see. And so you originally, I think you said you duct tape stuff, and then you had drones, and then you went to the rail system. Is that how that went?
Yeah, we ended up having so we did like 50 cameras, and that worked, and that was cool. And so like, great, what if we want to take this everywhere? And we did the math, and we're like, that's a lot of cameras.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it just wasn't economically viable. So that's why we had to get out of static cameras.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you know how to do the computer vision to do the seeing and counting and things?
We were playing around with OpenCV. We bought a company called High Tech Inc. It was a guy trying to figure it out as well with NDVI and stuff like that.
It's more classical computer vision with NDVI and
it was
contour mapping and shape.
I mean, we started off with just trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
And then what we realized once we got into it from the commercial side, once we hit commercial scale and people started to get viability, OpenCV was too brittle, and it didn't do what we needed to do, and classical was too brittle. So we had to move to machine learning based.
Welcome to the new world.
Yeah, machine learning based. We don't use Plant CV or Open CV. It just wasn't. We had to roll our own, unfortunately.
And you had some venture funding at this point?
We had angel funding until the customer said, we want to scale up with you, and we started getting more LOIs and customers who wanted to buy more. And so that pull from the market meant that people started to lean into us, and then we got both family office and venture funding, and then someone heard about us in San Francisco, and then all of a sudden we ended up going down and doing the circuit down there. And this is back in the Sandhill days, right? And so I was such an idiot back then. And I look back at the circuit we ran, I was like, why today my current self would not do this. I was like, well, why would it just doesn't, it's not a good fit. But we did the circuit with Andreessen and Sequoia and all that. And I think we ended up talking to 300 VCs.
Wow.
Ran a process, kissed a lot of frogs, and then all of a sudden we got one big contract and everyone wanted to pile in, and then we were oversubscribed, right? And so and then we ended up wanting to get some tech VCs and some ag VCs, and the ag VCs have a much longer term time horizon. Tech VCs are, if you grows, it grows, great. If not, like we're not going to spend time on anything that isn't unicorn. I guess now they would call it a decacorn. I wonder what it is. Is it a decacorn, like a unicorn with 10 heads?
Yeah.
Like how does it? What does that look like?
Yeah.
Is it a 10-sided unicorn? Like what does it look like? Anyways, that just makes me think of corn. Now I'm getting hungry. The VC circuit then was honing, and I got an introduction from one of our investors and advisors. His name is Naveen, and we ended up going deep down with Initialized Capital, which was Gary and Alexis, and we went deep with Fuel Capital, and then we went deep with Liquid 2 Ventures, and all of a sudden they started to lean in, and then Joe Montana introduced me to the former CEO of Whole Foods, Walter Robb, who ended up becoming a friend and an investor. And
Joe
Walter
Montana is with who?
Liquid 2 Ventures.
So through Liquid 2, you met Joe Montana, and Joe Montana, who's Joe Montana?
Joe Montana is a 49er quarterback.
And so he introduced you to, that was your kind of next step. He started getting you some of the next step intros then?
Yeah. And then it just sort of in that network, when you get that sort of hot deal feeling, right? Where all of a sudden you go from pitching them to them pitching you, that dynamic shifted.
Prom king.
And you're kind of just like, nothing changed, but okay. Right. Like in your mind, you're just in your business and you're doing what you do and you're operating. And all of a sudden when that dynamic shifted, it just clicked for everybody and they got it. And all of a sudden everyone wanted to pile in, and then introductions started to happen. And that's where I started getting introductions to more of the food and ag VCs. And then S2G Ventures came and visited our customer, and our customer said, this is awesome. Then they invested. And then all of a sudden from there was sort of this roll. And then we raised our Series A with that.
How much did you raise?
$7 million. We started with 3.
Yeah.
And we ended up being told that 3 was too small for a Series A, and it was no man's land. Well, I think we started at 1.5, then to 3, and then 3 to 7, because between 1.5 and 3, they said it was no man's land, that was too small for someone to get excited and too big for angels. And so I don't know. I've probably got 800 people giving me advice at this point.
Right.
So you don't know.
And they're
up
all-
from down at that
I always
point.
wonder how people pick the number, right? It's all kinds of various. Sometimes it's an actual honest bottoms up analysis. Sometimes it's exactly that. They like, well, it's an A, and
Kind of just feel which way the wind's going.
yeah, that's right. It would be odd to not pick
Honestly.
a number in the range. So
Yeah.
And we almost did YC.
Yeah.
We ended up deciding not to do that. I think we were a little bit too late stage for that. I probably would have done it earlier. We tried to do YC early on when we were just doing the lights plus cameras. And then
was that still Sam Altman days?
and so then they're like, oh, and then once we did the Series A, then they said you can come in. You're like, oh wait, I don't know if we want. It's a little late stage for that. So we were toying on that, and then one of our advisors and friend and investors, Naveen, went through with the Immunity Project, so I got to get access to that community and go through a lot of his learnings with him. So I got to see that from that side, and so I felt like I got to get some of the benefits of YC without being in YC, which was kind of interesting. And I had to understand how demo day worked and how people FOMO'd and how people fundraised. And it was fascinating. I think the one after what would have been our cohort was Flexports. And I think Flexport raised at a relatively low valuation. It was like 20 or 25. And so a bunch of our friends got in on that. And so it was the early days. And we ended up not doing that and just sticking with the Series A with some tech, some ag VCs.
Yeah.
And then...
How did you learn how to pitch? Make a pitch
I was going to
deck?
ask that too.
You don't.
Okay.
You don't learn how to pitch. You I don't know. I'm not a good salesperson. Like, I'm a systems product guy at heart, right? Like, I like systems processes. And from a pitch perspective, I would do it differently today. If I were to do pitch from scratch, I would bucket the best investors that I thought were the best fit, not best meaning like highest quality, just like who's the best fit, who's the second best fit cohort of that, and who's the worst fit. And I would take that and I would go the opposite direction. And I would take my really crappy pitch, because you got to do it thousands of times for it to become perfect. So at least for me, right? I'm not that good. So I have to do it over and over and over and over. And so if I were me today doing a Series A, I would start with the worst group of people with probably the stretch fit. And then by worst, I don't mean like they're bad. It just stretch fits.
Fit for you.
Give them the pitch. You're probably not going to get there. Then move your way up to the B cohort, which is the stuff that like could be a fit. Then you really push there. And then by the time you get to the last cohort, it's counterintuitive, but you've honed your pitch so much that it also is your highest chance and they're the best fit. That's how I would do it today. But that's not what I did.
What did you do instead?
Every single person who would answer my call, I'd fly in. And Chris Howard, Fuel Capital, said something to me that he learned from Dan Beatty, which is a UW entrepreneur that did pretty well in the community for the last, few decades. And he goes, you must be present to win. And that will stick with me forever. And so the thing that I probably do differently than most people is if it's important, I fly out no matter what.
Okay.
And so like you must be present to win. And so I think that's something that has stuck with me and something that like still sticks with me today.
It's a challenge, right? Because a lot of VCs nowadays don't actually go into the office. A lot of them don't. It's hard. There's not really an opportunity even to be present. Maybe those are the
maybe
players,
I'm more pushy than most people, but I think you're right. Fundamentally, COVID changed everything.
Yeah.
But I think that VCs are people too. And if you want to go out and fly out and visit them for coffee down the street from their house, they're going to understand you better than if they're behind Zoom fatigue and being like, here's my 12th pitch of...
It's really good advice.
And so just like...
I totally agree.
The extra 5% is enough of a differentiator. And life's more fun in person.
That's for sure.
Like, who wants to be behind? Zoom fatigue is real. I don't know.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
terrible.
Man, it's the other problem with it is people are always, no matter what it is, you can watch people switching screens and doing
Watch
something.
their eyes.
Even if it's an important thing, the temptation to like check that email or a Slack just came in or whatever, people always do this.
My favorite is when people wear glasses and you can see their screen.
You see
Oh,
that?
yeah.
They're all wearing glasses and you're like, oh,
Busted.
is that YouTube going on
Yeah.
over there?
Like,
Is that
nice.
email? And because you can't read anything, but you can just see their screen doing this constantly while they're
Yeah.
moving. And
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I mean, back to your principle about presence, right? And not losing that. Yeah.
But I mean, if you look at throughout society, that's a pattern that we're normalizing, which is that like being present isn't important. You must be willing. We don't value switching costs. Like that's fundamentally the number one most important thing for me today is to value switching costs. And if I can stay focused for 2 hours of focus, I can get 8 hours of work done than if I have to do every 15 minutes switching.
Totally.
And I think we don't understand, nor do we quantify effectively switching costs.
Yep.
And that is something that I don't know how we're going to quantify or if it's just going to require society to go through more pain. But like that's something that I wish we spent more on as society, because whether we're talking about in business or whether we're talking about in as adults or even kids, right? Everyone's being taught right now that there are no switching costs, and you can overload yourself with distractions all you want,
yeah.
and you're going to be way happier because of that, because you have no ability to focus. And if you missed a dopamine hit for 15 minutes, pull out your phone and look at your machine, and the machine will tell you something that makes you feel different, and will tell you how to feel, and will then give you that dopamine hit, and then you can get distracted again, right? And so it's just like a world of distractions. And I think I'm not special. I'm like, I have the same problem, but I just wish there was something that we'd acknowledge that issue for kids, for adults, for business, for everything. It's everywhere now.
Yeah.
Paul Graham wrote an article about that. Paul Graham, the founder of Y Combinator, wrote an article about that called Maker's Time, Manager's Time. And the idea, I mean, it's definitely true. The idea that a coder is down, heads down, focusing on something, and one program manager stopping by and saying, hey, can I get a status update, has just ruined an hour's worth of work. That basically you broke the concentration. Whatever that person was doing is now gone from their head. They're switching tasks to try to answer this program manager question. When they come back into it again, they've lost context, they lost motivation, they lost focus, right? You just blew, an hour for this person, for this one status update that probably didn't need to happen even at all, potentially. And that there's always this conflict between managers wanting to know what's happening and sort of making sure people are working versus what it takes to actually get tech work done, and that conflict is counterproductive.
Totally.
Yeah, and there's a meme I'll send you that has this exact comic. I guess we call them memes comics now, or comics memes now, but it's a comic that's 10 years ago where it shows how someone was about to solve all the world's problems or the meaning of life or something, and it was a big long board, and the manager comes out and goes, hey, can I ask you a question? And poof, it all disappeared. And it took him like 12 hours to get to that point.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so for engineering, that's real. I mean, we call it internally going into the matrix.
Yeah.
And so when you go into your box, right, and you go into your into the matrix, we do stop each other from distractions.
Yeah,
and so it's important to be able to say, look, I'm deep in this. I don't, and it's nothing rude, but if you don't have time for it, just tell people, and they understand that you're deep in it. And that switching cost is real.
Yeah. If you're free from 1 to 3 and you're like, cool, I'm going to get some work done, I'm going to get some code done or whatever, you're going to look at it, some financial analysis or whatever you need to do. Somebody throws a 15-minute meeting in your schedule at 1:45, you're like, you're screwed, right? Because you can't get into it. You can't get into it. You can't get into, even just for like the act of making sure you don't miss that 1:45 discussion from 1 until 1:45. You're only half paying attention because you're like, is it 1:45 yet?
Totally.
Is it? You know what I mean? It's like a constant.
Yeah.
This applies across all of life. Like if you're talking to people who meditate or monks, they talk about dropping in, right? They drop into that state.
Yeah.
If you talk to engineers and you talk about the concept of dropping into that state, it's just a different layer of consciousness of like where they get to.
Yeah.
And whether we're talking about engineering or whether we're talking about meditation, we're talking about all these other professional tennis players, right? You drop into that mental state.
Yeah.
And I think since we don't acknowledge that, we aren't actually optimizing for it.
Yeah. That's what I think is the problem. Who is it? Steve Covey, the quadrant, the urgent, important matrix.
The Eisenhower matrix?
Yeah. And where we've gotten as society is, you obviously have your urgent, important.
Yep.
Non-urgent, non-important is rest, which is important. But then how much time we spend in box 3, which is urgent, unimportant. But it just takes up so much of our time. And then you lose that 4th box, which is unurgent, important, which is creativity and space, and like where our best time is spent in many regards. So I think about that all the time. Yeah. So with IUNU, where's IUNU today? How do you feel like throughout journey, fundraising, et cetera, team, changing, who is Adam, the leader today at IUNU?
I don't know. I don't consider myself Adam the leader. That might sound weird, but right now I think stage appropriate leadership is a real thing. And so I still lead from the front right now, but it's not something I desire to do. We're in about 15 countries. So it's a lot of time zones, a lot of getting up early, not a lot of sleep from that. I'm trying to get better at that, but it's hard to have conversations with the Netherlands and Greece, and at the same time have conversations with people in San Francisco and Texas, and it's a pain. We're about 15 countries, about 100 facilities. We're about 50, 60 people, and I think the Adam the leader has grown a lot, right? Learning by doing, learning by failing. I don't think you need to fail to learn, but when you do fail, there's a book called Black Box Thinking where it talks about like you never waste a good crisis, right? In order to learn, keep iterating. I believe in that. Like if you're gonna have a crisis, you might as well learn from it and milk it for everything you can, right? And so I think as a person who's running the company, you start to realize that the bigger you get, you start to realize that there are more and more ways of looking at the world and more ways of getting things done. And you're fighting more and more culture decay just constantly. The bigger you get, the more personalities you have, the harder it is to align people. So I think one of the things that I used to be good at when we were 5, 10, 15 people was you could align what everyone wanted perfectly into, even though everyone wanted different things, you could align it into that one goal pretty well. But once you get above 50 to 100 people, it's much harder to get everyone aligned. And so you spend a lot more effort to align people. So I spend a lot more time on people now than I did before. And you're really just trying to, I forget who said this, but I do agree with it, that you should base the success of yourself based on the success of those around you. So right now it's like, how do I help my teammates and the leaders and my colleagues become the best version of themselves, or themselves, I should say, and how do I help them become the best leaders, the best colleagues, and we spend a lot of time trying to figure out what people's strengths and weaknesses are, that I didn't do that before when we were smaller. And then instead of trying to fix their weaknesses, we just try to backfill them. It's like, okay, you're not good at this thing. We don't care. That's great. You're amazing at this. This person's really good at your weakness. Boom. Let's just backfill that. And so I think you start trying to figure out how to systematize it in a way that allows you to, at our current stage, you're still able to do it at a personalized and personal basis. But once you get above about 100, I think it's going to be hard. And so trying to realize the bigger we get, the less personal it becomes. And so I'm trying to relish this moment of that it's still personal. I still know everybody. I still know their families. Like I like to go take them to dinner and get to know them. And, it's still very personal. And
this is why small companies beat big companies, is what you just said. You can optimize for people's strengths instead of trying to fit everybody into the box that it says on their title. And that means that you're more efficient than any company that's too large to be able to do that. I think that's but it is a learning that, they don't teach you in the business books or whatever, right? Like the whole teachings of places like McKinsey is, for example, that people are just completely fungible and you build a layer of whatever you need.
It's all a framework.
Yeah. That's right. Tell me about, so you mentioned sleeping at the office. You literally lived in your office for a while, right?
Yeah, Village Capital, bless their hearts, sent me a pillow.
God bless.
I had a sleeping bag. I bought a sleeping bag. It was a cheap one, $35. And I was sleeping at the office, and they knew I was grinding. And every hour counts at that moment. And so I was working 20 hours a day.
Did you have employees at that point?
Yeah.
And they were doing not similar amounts of work?
No, you can't expect people to be as crazy as you.
And so you were there, you would wake up and you'd be like, oh my God, what was I doing? Oh yeah, here, let's go. And then you'd like get tired and go back to sleep. It's hard to go to sleep because you're thinking about what.
When you're in your 20s, you should work hard.
Okay.
Right? Like when you're in your 20s, you need to learn as much as you can early on because it compounds over time. The earlier you can learn everything, the more it compounds the older you get. Okay. Right? And that was an early concept from my grandfather to tell me that. And so for me, it was like, I need to put as much hours in as possible. And so if I can learn what is 16, 20 hours a day, I'm learning 2 to 3 times faster than every other human being. And at that moment, now I can be, by the time I'm 30, I'll actually have the experience of a 55-year-old or 60-year-old.
Okay. Your grandfather taught you this.
Sorry?
Your grandfather taught you this.
Yeah. And he talks about it lightweight, so it wasn't like a big mantra or anything with him, but I sort of started thinking about that. And so for me, I was like, how do I compound that early? How do I put in as much hours as possible to learn? And then because knowledge is now evenly distributed, it's commoditized, but wisdom is not. So how do I get the experience to be able to say, by the time I'm 40, I'm going to be a 70-year-old in experience in terms of hours worked, right? Because you learn from working, and you learn from good decisions, but also you learn from working. And so I pushed as much of that early as possible and made almost no money. I think I was spending $36,000 a year living in a basement apartment that I was at probably 3-4 days a week. And the rest I was sleeping at the office, and it comes at a price, right? So I lost a lot of my friends, not because I didn't like them or they didn't like me, but I just, at some point when they say, hey, do you want to go hang out? Do you want to do something? And after the 20th time they do that, eventually they stop, right?
Yeah, you fall off the radar.
And so some of my closest friends are not my closest friends anymore because of that, right? It came with sacrifices. I have like 3 or 4 really close, I call best friends from high school that I'm less close with now, unfortunately, because I spent 7 to 8 years disappearing.
Just grinding.
Yeah.
Just disappeared from the world.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot about what it actually takes to build something. And I learned a lot about, a lot of it's mental.
Yeah.
Like I know people talk a lot about mental health, but for me, it's about mental toughness. And you have to be willing to dig deep and embrace it. And you have to be mentally tough in order to do something like this. And so sleeping at the office to me was just like, okay, how do I it's 20 minutes to get home, 20 minutes back. It's 40 minutes wasted. I can just stay here. Right. And so you just start optimizing everything. And what else did I optimize? I started taking like lion's mane and reishi and lion's mane and cordyceps to wake up, and MCT oil to wake up. And I started doing reishi to go to sleep, right? Like just trying to find different ways to work with your brain to get it to be fully functional faster through, I don't know.
Did it work?
Yeah.
You think so? The lion's mane. And
you can get noticeable. It's not like you're going to become smarter, but your synapses will fire faster. Your ability to go from being tired to fully functioning, like top of your game, can happen faster with help. Right. And so I think some of that stuff was helpful. And working out, like you got to physically keep yourself there, and blood pressure is part of that. So you have to get your heart rate up. And so if you don't work out, at that point I was doing a lot more workouts than I am now, but I was working out twice a day. And that was because then I could sleep for 4 hours, work out, wake up, work. And then right when I feel myself crashing, like 3 or 4 p.m., work out again, and then it'd ride out for the rest of the night.
Yeah. Good release.
It's just body optimization. It's like the difference between like the meat package and the mind, right? Like you gotta get one of them up to get to the other one up.
they're definitely part of this. They definitely meet in the middle somewhere, let's say.
But so, I don't do that anymore.
So speaking about learning, something I learned from you, tell me about ROI moments.
All right. One of the things that we measured on KPIs as a company is ROI moments, which is just the concept of places where people got return on investment from something that your product did. Whether it's an interaction, it's a advisory, it's a feature, it's a moment in which they got return on their investment. And then we started doing another thing, which I learned from Chuck, who was the founder of OpenTable, is he used to send out a bill, but the bill would go to the accounting department or something like that. And that's different than people who use your system. And so when he sent the bill, he would send the ROI moments with them. So like the return on their investment, the value they got. And so now when we send a bill, we also send value with it and ROI moments with it. And the reason for that is because the people who are paying the bills need to understand they're getting value out of it too. And for us, we kind of structure it like an SLA. So it's really data as a service, right? Where people have these plants and we're bringing them a new type of data that they haven't been able to extract, especially not at scale, and delivering it to them. It's sometimes a new concept. It's not like saying, hey, here's your bill for your water, right?
Right.
So you have to. So OpenTable did that.
It's something they didn't necessarily even have a budget line item for. That you're making your own budget line item by presenting this ROI to them.
Yep.
So, speaking of your office and UNU and all this grind and everything, is there anything you want to say about anybody you've leased space to from your office there at UNU or not?
Oh, beast mode?
Well, if you want to say anything about that.
Yeah, sure. We sublet the front of our office for a few years to Marshawn Lynch and his team.
Who is?
Marshawn Lynch is a former NFL player. He was a running back for the Seattle Seahawks. And just nice guy, all around, like really good guy. And
He's famous
expect-
for saying that thing in the conference, right? Where they the interview where he said, "I'm just here so I don't get fined." Right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
That was his. That was
And he loves Skittles.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah.
We used to have a Skittles vending machine in the office.
No
Right on.
way.
Yeah, and so it was because I think he was sponsored by it, so you could get all the different types, and so each cup would have a different one you can
Oh, gosh, heaven.
dispense out of, and him and his team were fun to have in the front office, and they're good people. And
How did this relationship start?
Yeah.
He rolled in one day and he's like, "Hey, do you have any space?" Well, how did this start?
someone told him that he might be able to lease space from somewhere in Pioneer Square near
CenturyLink,
CenturyLink,
which I
and
called
since we're-
Quest earlier.
yeah, which now is called Lumen Field.
Now it's called Lumen.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
It's okay. They'll change it next year
I know.
too. So
So did he show up or did he?
yeah, he
send
showed
it?
up and
He rolled in and he's like,
yeah, he made a joke. He's like, "Oh, hi, my name's New Tenant" or something like that. And I was like, "What?" And I don't know. He's just a funny guy. Like when we signed the contracts, the just for the sublease, it had name and title, right? And you don't think twice about that having been, but for him, he thinks it's hilarious. So he
Yeah.
signed his name, and then his title was Daddy.
okay. Oh man.
Oh,
I don't know. It's just like he's a relaxed, like
Yeah.
He's
really smart.
hilarious.
He has wisdom. He's definitely wise beyond his years, and he has a lot of wisdom about what his surroundings. So I think, I don't know him that well, but when I did get to know him, I got a lot of respect for him and his team and the way that they look at the world as opposed to, I think, some ways that people are portrayed, right? And so he's a person too that's also
And he had a storefront. He put a storefront in there.
sold apparel. Yeah,
You could go buy Beast Mode hats and
yeah. I have a Beast Mode hat from him.
yeah,
I wear it sometimes.
That's
Being a
pretty
baseball player, I wear a lot of hats.
that is cool.
That's
You still
really
talk to
fun.
him at all, or he's not leasing from you anymore? He's
No, he's not.
Yeah.
I mean, if I see him, like I think the last time I saw him was we were at sushi with Sean Kemp, and I ran into him,
Well,
and I don't know. He
Is he still here? Is he still in Seattle?
I don't think so.
Yeah,
I think he's
I
either
would
in
think so.
Vegas or he's in
Yeah.
California.
Yeah.
But I think he's now pivoting to media.
Yeah.
I think he's like getting into acting and stuff like that.
Did you see the video of him visiting NASA?
No.
Oh, you gotta watch it. It's awesome. He like gets on like the comms with the astronauts, and he was like, "What? What's up?" He's just so fun and has so much life.
Speaking
Yeah.
of the art of being present,
yeah.
that gentleman is very present.
Yes.
He's one of the things I can learn from him is that life is more fun if you're present.
Yes, he's so much fun.
Yeah, and so I think that's something that he not only brings to every conversation,
Yeah.
but also I think other people will think he's funnier because of it.
Yeah,
Right?
and also being unapologetically yourself. I feel like he's really good at that too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, like the best man.
So UNU is how big now?
About 50 people.
50 people.
Mm-hmm.
And you are how old now? What would that be? You said 17. So
Mm-hmm.
you're 7 years old. Is that right?
So incorporation is 11 years old now.
Wow.
So
Okay.
last year is our 10-year anniversary. Really the venture scale and the venture side of it, sort of data as a service,
Yeah.
is since 2017.
And is there a place? Could I go somewhere and see your product in operation? Is there a local air like you must have a lot of customers.
Yeah, if you go to the grocery store, so this is something, if you want to help out our industry and you want to buy local produce, go to the grocery store and look for greenhouse grown. A lot of times they don't allow us to make it organic. another gripe I have, is because we don't use most of the industry doesn't use pesticides. Organic certifies pesticides that are organic. But if you don't find a way to pay the organic certifier, oftentimes it's harder to get there. And so there's a fight of whether or not hydroponics is organic. You can have living microbes in hydroponics just like you can soil. And so I think one of the things that we need to educate on is that people, when they go to the grocery store, would be better off buying things that weren't sprayed, like greenhouse lettuce, for example, or with less sprays. So if you can go buy tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, you can buy lettuce. We're starting to see strawberries come through. All these places at the grocery store support your local grower, your local farmer. That's probably the best thing I could say. And right now we're at the beginning of it. So 62% of all the tomatoes consumed fresh in the United States today are greenhouse tomatoes. 2% of lettuce is greenhouse. So and then in between that is eggplant, cucumber, pepper, strawberries. And so the whole industry is going to end up growing to be about 50 to 60% of every one of those verticals being grown in greenhouses. And they're all going to be grown right outside your city, right outside your neighborhood. And so we don't have enough growers to do that. So that's why we're trying to build scalability tools. But we need more people to support it, more people to want to buy it. And not only is it more food safe, but it also has less sprays on it and things like that. So hopefully people can go out and support their greenhouse farmers.
Final question I think that would be good to ask you is what's next? So where does IUNU go from here? Where does Adam go from here?
Where does Adam go from here, and where does IUNU go from here? I think one of the things, and maybe you can relate to this a little bit, and I'm actually curious if you relate to this as well, is you have to be careful not to let the company become you and you become the company. When you're working as hard as I did when I was sleeping at the office, it was very much intertwined. And now I'm able to, from a stage appropriate perspective, and the team is carrying the brunt of the load, I'm able to be more of myself and less just being the company, right? And so where does IUNU go from here is IUNU needs to continue to execute and deliver the scalability tools that we're starting to see. Think of it as SCADA systems from manufacturing or centralized management of distributed facilities. And you have to unlock that by giving profitable ways for us to have thousands of these greenhouses without having to hire a grower. And a lot of these growers make $250,000 a year, right? And that's expensive, and they require lots of experience. So IUNU has to achieve that unlock, if you will, right? If you're thinking about this as a game, you have to unlock that achievement to be able to do one really good grower managing 5 or 10 facilities or 5 or 10 X the amount of acreage. And so IUNU's working towards that and closing the loop, as opposed to the open loop we have today, which is people are just running around trying to figure out where to spend their time to solve problems. Instead, let's focus that and allow greenhouses to become more autonomous. So I think autonomous growing is where IUNU goes. And I think it happens faster now that food security, and you're starting to see, we used to have a global economy, and now we're moving towards a much more of an isolationist policy. And as the world moves towards a more isolationist policy, the more food security matters, the more I think we're going to see a tailwind of regulatory benefits as well to local food production. So I think that'll help us. And so IUNU is going to ride that wave to being the one that delivers that sort of operating system for local food production. And I think Adam is going to continue to operate, and there's a little bit of imposter syndrome, and there's a little bit of why me. I take what I do very seriously. I think probably people say too much. I'm probably a loyalist at heart, and that in some ways is a bad thing for a lot of people. But for me, I'm proud of it. I think most people don't realize when you're the CEO of a C corporation in the United States, you have a fiduciary obligation to maximize everything you can for the value of the company. And I think some people don't take that very seriously. And I take that oath very seriously. So for as long as I'm CEO of this company, I'm going to be doing everything I can to make this the biggest and most impactful company possible to be able to bring that local food production. And we're either going to get acquired, or we're going to start using our profits to reinvest in growth, and then go from there to start acquiring other people. It's one or the other, and quite frankly, only time will tell. but having a strategy that's 10 years out, which is what we do, it means we're well situated to handle however the market goes, especially because it's food, which is economically inelastic. And so I think that's something I'm excited to tackle. And then, I don't know, Adam's going to continue to do, as you said, what's next for Adam? I think, as one of my colleagues says, that's a future Adam problem.
That's awesome. Well, whatever that ends up being, we're going to be excited to be along for the ride and watch you continue to make that impact, Adam. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for what you're doing to make our food better, safer, and more of it. And can't wait to watch what's next for you.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Adam.
Cool.
All right. That's a wrap. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Tech Out West.
Be sure to follow us on Twitter and YouTube. And of course, reach out with any ideas of who you want us to interview next at techoutwest@gmail.com. We'll see you on the next one.